Good evening. I'd like to call the special meeting of April 27, 2015 with Palo City Council to order. Would clerk call the roll, please?
Councilmember Berman. Councilmember Burt. Here. Councilmember Du Bois. Here. Councilmember Philseth. Mayor Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Niss. Councilmember Scharf. Vice Mayor Schmidt.
Here.
Councilmember Wolbach.
Here.
5 present.
Thank you. So now we'll consider going into closed session regarding conference with city attorney, potential litigation with significant exposure to litigation pursuant to subdivision B of section 54956.9 and communications defendant, one potential case is defendant communications and power industries. And so we need a motion from council whether we go into closed session or not.
So moved. Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Councilmember Burt, seconded by Vice Mayor Schmidt, that we would go into closed session. I see no light, so we'll vote on the board. And that motion passes on a 5-0 vote with Council members Scharf, Philseth, Niss, and Berman absent.
Have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
council is returning from closed session, and there is no reportable action. So we return now to the rest of our agenda, which is a study session, item number 2, fiscal year 2016 proposed budget overview. City Manager Keene.
Thank you. Good evening. As I think you know, I'm a little bit under the weather, so and on top of which you all have just scheduled a half an hour for this session because you got a big topic this evening. So I probably will depart after the consent calendar, but I did want to be sure to fulfill my obligations here on transmitting the operating and capital budgets for fiscal year 2016. What we will do, particularly for those of you council members who will new, I'm going to read just some excerpts from the transmittal letter that will be here in the that's in the budget document itself, and then Walter and his team will hand out the budgets and very quickly, briefly go through the document just to orient you to it. In particular, he'll want to show you some slides related to the capital budget, since we've made some significant changes in the reporting and the capital budget, really to follow up on directives from the council. So, Honorable Mayor and City Council, in accordance with my responsibility as City Manager, as outlined in the City Charter, I'm submitting the City of Palo Alto's fiscal year 2016 proposed operating budget. The citywide expenditure budget of $553.7 million has increased by $83 million, I'm going to round these off, or 17.7% in comparison to the fiscal year 2015 adopted budget of $470 million. This is primarily due to a change in carrying forward capital funds from one year to the next, so that you can see the full impact of capital funding and projects. That accounts for slightly over $50 million of that $83 million increase. Utility purchases at $9.3 million, salary and benefits at $8.8 million, and additional general infrastructure funding of $5 million are the notable deltas between the two fiscal years. The proposed general fund operating budget is $185 million, increased by $14 million or 8.2% in comparison to the prior year. Again, primarily due to an increase in the infrastructure funding. All of that $5 million is there. Salary and benefits costs of $5.9 million. Citywide, and I know that the Finance Committee and ultimately the Council will want to, as you did last year, take a hard look at the position recommendations in this year's budget, but I did want to be sure Finance had the opportunity to assess and respond to, at least our attempt to respond to the council priorities and demands facing the city. Citywide, across all of the funds, full-time FTE benefited positions are increasing by a net of 7.3 FTEs. That's less than 1%, up from 1033 in the 2015 budget to 1041. The net year-over-year increase of 7.3 is attributed to includes a decrease of 6 FTE positions approved during the council in this fiscal year, offset with an increase of 13 positions. Despite this increase, a decade ago, the city's total budgeted position count was 1,073 FTEs, or 3.3% above this level. For the general fund over the same period, the budget position count was 649 FTEs, or 7.5% more than the recommended budget that I'm proposing at this time. During that same 10-year period, the city's population grew by approximately 4,300 residents, or 7%. So they put these numbers in contrast. I share, though, the council's concern continuously about the impact, in particular, of long-term benefited positions. The General fund expenditure budget is balanced with $183.5 million in revenues and $1.6 million in fiscal year 2015 carry forward surplus funds, which is out of an estimated $5 million surplus that we project at the end of April 2015. As part of this budget, the general fund budget stabilization reserve, is often called in shorthand the BSR, is projected to be at the 18.5% mark, or $34.2 million by the end of 2016, and that's right in the sort of sweet spot of the council's policy recommendations. Compared to last year's adopted budget, general fund tax revenues increased $8.2 million in the fiscal year 2016 budget, and these are major contributors towards the $14 million or 8.3% increase in general fund budget. It is important to note that a third of the growth in tax revenue, about $3 million, is due to the voter-approved transient occupancy tax rate increase approved in November. As you all know, in January, you adopted priorities that address transportation, long-term planning, infrastructure investment, and healthy communities. And to support these priorities, the proposed budget includes investment in parking and transportation funding, infrastructure, increased library hours, and reporting on city funding related to the Healthy City, Healthy Community Initiative. As directed by council, staff has started to implement several strategies to address traffic congestion in the city, and as part of our multi-layered mitigation plans, as you know, efforts include parking management strategies such as residential permit parking program, implementation of parking technologies, garage wayfinding, signage, transportation demand management strategies such as the creation of a transportation management association, enhanced shuttle services, funding, Caltrain Go Pass program for employees, et cetera, and short-term and long-term parking supply strategies such as valet parking, construction of new garages as identified in the council-approved infrastructure plan. This budget proposes additional investments for parking and transportation to implement the council-approved strategies, including 2 positions in the Planning and Community Environment Department related directly to transportation and planning. There are actually 3 positions being added in planning, and in one sense shifting one and backfilling one in development services, adding a 4th position in planning, which I'll explain later. In June 2014, the council approved the $125.8 million infrastructure plan, which provides funding for a new public safety building, replacement of 2 fire stations, funding of our BOLD bicycle pedestrian transportation plan, 2 parking garages, and other projects. For detailed information relating to that plan, Walter will be directing you to the proposed capital budget. And although adopted, the council-approved infrastructure plan had a funding gap of $7.5 million at the time of adoption. To address the gap and consistent with the long-range financial forecast of 2016 to 25, an additional $9.4 million, $4.7 million each in 2016 and fiscal 2017 is proposed to be transferred from the general fund to the capital improvement fund to support the full infrastructure plan. This transfer, which is possible to do due to additional TOT receipts, will close the funding gap of $7.5 million, provide funding for the public art program related to the infrastructure plan, and fund a small reserve for cost increases. The 2016 budget includes that first-year transfer of $4.7 million. And to support the implementation of the plan, the budget does include the addition of 1 engineer position in the Public Works Department. In November 2014, the city opened the new Mitchell Park Library and Community Center and the remodeled Rinconada Library to our community this early spring. And in response to feedback from users who are enjoying the new facilities and council member comments to me, this budget proposes to increase library operating hours by 32 hours or 14% per week. from 228 hours to 260 hours per week beginning in mid-August to coincide with the start of a new school year. To support these increased library hours, the budget includes the addition of the equivalent of 4.8 positions, 3.3 full-time positions, and 1.5 effective temporary or part-time positions. In conjunction with increased library hours at the Mitchell Park Library, the budget also includes funding for increased recreation operating hours, supported by modest staff additions at the Teen Center located at Mitchell Park Community Center. I would imagine the Finance Committee may want to take a closer look at my recommendations to see if you think that is enough expansion at that location, given the extended range of hours for the libraries. This year, the council added the Healthy City, Healthy Community Initiative, and this budget includes funding for a community public health consultant to conduct a study regarding health challenges for our residents based on age and other demographics, use of emergency medical services, and other statistics. And we'll be mostly trying to cobble together different funding sources that are already provided or initiatives we have in our budget to report on how we are responding to the council's initiative in that regard. In addition to the 2015 council priorities, this budget addresses other important initiatives, such as continuing to advance the development services blueprint, the takeover of the Palo Alto airport, and initial funding towards planning and then rehabilitation of the Cubberley Community Center included in the fiscal year 2016 budget. And further, as I've reviewed the city operations during the last year, in addition to listening to issues consistently raised in our community and by council, this budget recommends more spending in code enforcement staffing, adding additional special events in arts and science programs funding, and enhancements towards operational effectiveness and design of alternative service delivery models and greater use of information technology. As of April this month, staff anticipates that the general fund, as mentioned, will have savings of $5 million. And as I mentioned earlier, we are carrying forward $1.6 million into the 16 budget. Just to highlight on some of the new funding or the additional funding in this budget related to parking and transportation funding, a total of about $574,000. That includes a parking operations lead staff to support that work, a traffic operations lead to support that work. Some of it's funded in the general fund, some of it's coming out of the parking fund to fund those positions. As I mentioned earlier, the library opening hours and service enhancements is $493,000. I mentioned the staffing. But with the addition of those hours, all library branches at the city will open at 10 a.m. except for College Terrace, which will remain on its closure schedule, and the downtown library, which will remain on its the days it's closed during the week. It will expand weeknight, Monday through Thursday, operating hours at Mitchell Park and Rinconada libraries until 8 p.m., double Sunday operating hours at Mitchell Park and Rinconada libraries, currently now 1 to 5 p.m., and increasing those to 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. There is code enforcement staffing of $115,000. That adds one full-time code enforcement officer, primarily funded through the general fund, a bit funded through development services, which is offset by fees. And this really is to bring in a code enforcement lead who will train, coordinate, and provide daily direction to the two code enforcement officers. There's $100,000 in the budget related to the seismically vulnerable buildings study, which the council asked us to take a look at, and certainly part of our Healthy City, Healthy Community. And then the Recreation Division and Special Events staffing has about $223,000 added to it. It does add a community services superintendent and recreation, really to provide as a lead in coordinating not just this, but citywide special events coordination, and it will work on a lot of the direct division marketing initiatives and other programs related to cost recovery and recreation. Palo Alto Airport staffing, $79,000 increase. We did some analysis of contracting out versus bringing on a staff person to handle the maintenance operations, approved out now to be more effective to bring on a staff person. So this adds a net of one manager of maintenance operations with some cost savings elsewhere. And then lastly, there is a senior technologist position recommended for consideration to support public safety departments with the implementation of a lot of technology systems. We've got $95,000 in the budget for field patrol body-worn cameras to add to our police department. There is a staffing position to support facilities management. There is a funding proposal to initiate a priority-based budgeting model, which ultimately during the budget process and beyond with finance and the council, Walter can talk about this methodology to add more discipline and rigor to how we prioritize, even working with the community and the council. There is a $50,000 funding for an individual review process peer review study, a $75,000 for regional fire and emergency medical services efficiency study, and a number of investments in technology, et cetera. On the enterprise fund side of things, as you are aware, given the interface between the UAC and finance, the 2016 budget includes utility rate adjustments for fiber optics, refuse, storm drain water, and wastewater charges. The average monthly residential utilities bill will be expected to increase 6.3%, or just under $15 a month, from $237 to $252. At this time, there are no rate increases in our most expensive services and funds in electric and gas services. But this does include a 12% water rate increases due to water supply costs from the SFPUC and the looming other challenges we're facing, and a 9% wastewater increase due to capital improvements at the plant, and a 9% refuse fund increase as part of the expansion of the residential food scrap collection program, and the storm drain fee has its 2.6% CPI increase. So our city continues to be at the epicenter of a thriving regional economy. The economic good times, as well as the voter-approved transportation occupancy tax increase, have generated significantly higher revenues for the city. The local boom has also resulted in an increase in job growth, more traffic, and a higher demand for parking and other city services. These issues are well recognized by the City Council, as reflected in your priorities, and as we best could do so with the revenues that we had, tried to align with council priorities and initiatives, the investments as I've outlined here. While the City Council will need to approve an annual budget for this coming year, we have to keep in mind the long-term goals of the city and the council. Work is still needed with our employee groups to reduce long-term pension and health care liabilities while remaining a competitive employer. The city has made good progress, and we are in negotiations with our public safety unions, and next year with SEIU, we'll need to focus on that. This budget has funding to support some degree of changes or new contracts for those groups. It also includes I think, a $7.6 million revenue received from Stanford University, and anticipating a continuation of providing fire services to Stanford. As you know, we're in negotiations with Stanford right now in that regard. And as I mentioned to the committee the other night, it does not include any additional funding for transitional support in the animal shelter operations. So to the extent that we go down that path, that will be something, as we work through with finance, we'll have to look at. I want to thank our council for your leadership, and our exec leadership team and our entire staff who provide outstanding services to our community. And a special thanks to Walter Rossman, Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and his team, Christine Perras, Eric Villamoria, Michael Bruckner, Paul Harper, and Sean O'Shea. You guys all here? They upstairs crunching numbers still.
We actually let him catch up on sleep.
Who worked countless hours and evenings on weekends to put this budget together, along with Lalo Perez, Chief Financial Officer, Joe Saccio, and Taryn Narari, and staff across the departments. We're honored to work with a dedicated council, professional city workforce, and a highly engaged community. And we look forward to working with finance and the council over the next month in bringing in a budget that can best serve our community. So with that, and I actually made it through that, I'm happy to hear. I will turn it over to Walter. Is that correct?
Thank you, Jim. Yes. Good evening, Walter Rossman, Budget Director. I just would like to quickly orient you, especially new council members. We have two budget documents, an operating budget document and a capital budget document. The operating one has the sections for each major fund section, such as citywides, enterprise, general fund, etc. But the real focus I want to share with the entire council today is the changes we have made to the capital budget. Last year, as part of the Finance Committee hearings, there were several changes which the committee asked for. The council approved the change in the code, how we carry forward funds from one fiscal year to the next. And that's the main reason why the capital budget is going from $57 million to $150 million just for the next fiscal year. Because instead of carrying the funds through an accounting process, we're doing it more through a budgeting process now. That also changed that this budget document, capital one, increased by 50%, not in pages though, only by 200 pages, but increased by 50% extra projects, which we're showing to you now. Projects which are in flight, projects which are currently handled by staff, and which they hope to close out a lot of those this next fiscal year. So going through this quickly, so the major change is carrying forward funds, which we're doing differently. You'll see this in the capital budget. We added a fund overview section for you. So if you look at the water fund, we just don't show you the project pages for the water fund, but we have a description on what's happening in this capital program. We made changes to the project pages and the design and format. So let me look at one specific section here, the electric fund. You will see in the capital budget document a funds summary narrative where staff brought together the major issues they're facing in that fund. You'll see a description of the major projects, what the major accomplishments are, and the major next initiatives. A financial summary, which brings up all the projects together and rolls them up in one big table. On the source side, revenues as well as expenditures. And lastly, a little tidbit for you, infrastructure inventory, what it's how many gas mains we have, how many vehicles we have, what types of vehicles, just interesting information to lighten up your day as you're going through the budget document. If you look at the project information, there are several things we did there. We added in initial project start date, which you see here. Then the revised project start date in case it changed. So you will have a much better sense, okay, we funded initially this year, that's when we wanted to start. However, we had issues. These are described in significant changes. So every year we'll keep track of those, and you can look back what happened to those projects. Same thing happens with the revised project completion date, actually the initial one and the revised one. Lastly, the financial information. There are several things you see now new. We're actually showing you the entire cost of a project, whether it's past costs, which we've done before, the budget from this fiscal year, are we going to spend that money? That's the estimated 2015 budget. And if we don't, we will ask you to carry it forward. Then we're looking how it's going to spend with the new plan. And sometimes what happens, the projects are so large, they go beyond the 5-year plan, and we show an estimate of that cost as well. So you'll see in the total project cost, what this entire project is going to potentially cost the city. It's a plan, and every year, as you know, it will get refined. And the other thing, which is still a work in progress for us, and that's the operating budget impact statement. What's really important is the linkage between capital and operating. We make decisions about the capital side, and we see this today with the Mitchell Park Library, and at the operating side, you will see this year, additional funds we're requesting for the green roof, for extra cleaning of the floors, the wooden floors, little tidbits you see in the operating side. And the plan is, if you do capital budgeting really well, that as you get closer with the project being completed, you refine, the staff refines the impact on the operating budget, and most likely actually before you approve it. So the council has a better idea. Am I improving a capital investment, which is great and wonderful, but has a long-term and heavy operating budget impact, or is it minimal? So that's one thing we're trying to do as well. So that's it for this short presentation. We'll pass out the budget documents. Looking forward to the conversations in finance and later on in June with council. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager and Walter as well. So, yes, we have our gifts being distributed. And this was really a presentation. It was an opening of a an opening of the conversation. If there are any brief comments by non-finance committee members, this would be a time to put them out there. We have 4 members who are not on finance. So if any of you have brief comments, Councilmember Du Bois.
First of all, thank you so much. I'm looking so forward to reading this. Can't wait. But seriously, thank you. We got an interesting email that I thought some interesting points. One was kind of a measure of span of control and kind of are we staffed at appropriate levels. So I'd be interested if you're going to include any kind of metrics of that sort as part of the budget. The other thing I think would be really useful would be maybe to provide some analysis of FTE in total, including consultants, because I think it would help people understand why we're using consultants, and potentially you could show full-time staff and potentially a cost savings over hiring versus outsourcing. Because I think we hear quite a bit from the community, both sides, like, why are we hiring? Why do we have so many consultants? And I think making that clear could be useful. There was also a comment about, I guess, the priority budgeting model. Could you explain that a little further? Like, is that going to start just in certain areas?
Sure. So there's a request in the budget to fund a consultant to get us going on priority-based budgeting. And what that effort does is, which is a pretty heavy organizational effort, is going beyond department level, going towards a programmatic level of the organization. So if you look at typical finance department, you have a budget office, you have accounts payable, you have accounting, you have payroll. And then looking at the programmatic level, have opportunities for outsourcing, number one. But do we have to do the service because it's federal mandated or city charter mandated? And how do the services align with broad outcomes the city is trying to provide to its citizens? And then you go through this analysis and you figure out, as part of the budget process, how often is this program used and how important is it to contribute towards its outcomes. So it's at least a year, if not 2-year effort. It may inform the 17 budget already, but again, it takes a lot of work by staff to look at our organization very differently. And then assigning dollars to it and establishing this process. It started about 5 years ago with the Center for Priority-Based Budgeting. They have done this now about over 100 cities, about 60 cities nationwide, and a few in California.
So would we potentially roll that out partially in 2017? Like maybe you don't do every single department, but you do some areas?
You actually start that would be a possibility, but you should start citywide, organization-wide at once. It's a question of capacity. You can't get it done in 6 months, but that takes staff time away from other priorities, and that's what we're trying to balance.
Okay. And the last quick question was, I guess, what was the comment you made, Jim, about the animal shelter, that there was no increase in budget? Or?
Yes, council member, the finance committee members were privy to this a little bit on the presentation that we had, but the recommendation from the auditor and my response, which was really completely aligned with hers, really recommends maintaining, for the long term, maintaining animal control and spinning off the animal shelter itself to either an existing or new not-for-profit. And I think there was good support for that and from the stakeholder community. But to do that, we've got about a year transition period. We're losing the existing director. You know, we've got to get some consultant assistance to do that. And so those transition costs that we were estimating, and these were just wild guesses, we will sharpen them with finance committee, but could be to $250,000. That's not in the budget yet. So I just wanted to call out anything that I thought was a looming potential that I had not specifically included yet.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Burt?
Well, thanks. I'll start with the capital improvement plan, or program, I should say, and just want to commend these changes in the format. Having looked at this as a planning commissioner for 9 years and 7 on the council, this is a really good improvement to how this is going to be presented, so we can really see the totality of what's going on in projects and see how things roll forward, and not try to understand something through a snapshot when it's really a moving picture. So I think this is really well done. Second, I want to say this is really great that we're going to be able to expand the library and community center hours. I think that's going to be very well received by the community. The new libraries seem to be extremely popular, and all we hear is, but why are they closing? And so this is a great response to that. Then I want to ask a follow-up question on the staff changes. We didn't have any kind of a written presentation in front of us, so I think we're all trying to go off of what we heard verbally. But what I thought I heard the city manager describe in additional staff positions within departments sounded to be more than what I thought I heard at the beginning of 7 net staff position increases. And so did the 2 add up, or are there some reductions in other places that made this pencil out?
Yeah, so there's a combination of some changes this year, but I did mention, but I probably just zoomed over it, that it does include a reduction of 6 FTEs this year from the 2015 budget that have already been sort of pushed through in a way. So there's more like 13 positions, but a net of 7 year-over-year changes. So when the Finance Committee and the Council looks at this, you'll be looking at about 10.9 positions or so in the general fund, in enough to make 13.3 in the other funds, 2.4.
Okay. And then I was glad to hear that we're having another code enforcement officer, but then I heard that it was a lead, and the description was that it would help kind of give oversight to the other 2 officers. So I wanted to understand whether that additional position
It's a working lead. I mean,
it's a working
lead. Yeah, it's
Okay.
not sitting back at the office.
Okay, great. And then the other thing was in the development center and planning. I certainly understand the additional transportation positions because we're investing a great deal into that, and that's going to be an ongoing investment in our community. But given the direction we are taking with things like the cap on new office, which would mitigate the level of new office growth that we've been having the last several years during a peak period, I was assuming that if anything, that might reduce the development center demands on the commercial side, and maybe to some marginal degree on the planning side, although I understand that planning has been understaffed. So could you explain that a little bit more?
I think that that's a good question. I think we'll have to work through that with the Finance Committee and with the Development Services Director. The positions in the Development Services budget can be a little bit confusing. There is the addition of an Assistant Chief Building Official, which really is a new position. And that's the one I think in particular will need to respond to what you're talking about, Councilmember. The other main position really is the addition of a planning manager, but that really is because the planning manager that has been assigned to work with the development services staff from planning is going back to planning to support more of the current planning efforts. And to be honest with you, I thought it was easier to fund the position that way with setting it off with offsetting it with new fees or whatever in development service. I mean, having it in development services rather than in the general fund. So, but I think the heart of the matter is the Assistant Chief Building Official. How does that relate to that? In the next 2 weeks or so, we will have before the council, I think, the consultant budget for development services that does have significant funding, flex funding for consultant assistants to provide development supported work. And that's, that we have some of those large budgets to do precisely what you're saying, is to not staff up as much as we need to so that we can you know, let go of consultant work without having to lay people off as there's a downturn. So I think those need to be looked at in conjunction, the entirety of the consultant budget and the staffing we have in development services.
And my final question comment is about a specific capital improvement area rather than the format. And this is probably best framed in terms of addressing our healthy community priority, but it's also recognizing a priority that I think is emerging in the community, and that is around potential capital investments that may be needed to provide security for our tracks. And we talk about healthy communities, and we really have what many people have recognized as a current teen health crisis in our community, and that we're coming to understand what experts have identified as an important way to address it that may be, to a great degree, a city role. I appreciate that the discussions are ongoing right now, and we don't have that plan in place. But if we are anticipating potential capital expenditures that could be significant, how does that fit into the capital improvement plan? If we come forward in the coming months and say that we want to move aggressively in this direction, where will that fit in the budget?
Thank you, council member. So I agree with you. I've been thinking about this a lot myself also. And one, we didn't have enough detail, and two, we didn't want to we're doing a lot of outreach, as you know, with Caltrain. So we want to look at those numbers after we've sort of gone down the road with them. But I think that our view is that there is a fair degree of fungibility within the accounts that we have in the infrastructure plan that could allow us to loan or transfer funds, or the truth is, even if we needed to, we could just come to the council with a budget amendment ordinance for a particular project. We've got things in the out years. We could find a way to pull that from the infrastructure plan to fund those.
And we have our general fund reserve, which has a range, and we transfer from the general fund varying amounts of dollars every year into the infrastructure. So am I correct that you would also have that fungibility that you could propose, and we could approve moving additional dollars from our general fund reserve into the infrastructure account?
We could do that. The budget as I targeted right now, I think, as we put it together, predicted an 18.5% budget stabilization reserve just in that particular account. And the council, we have flexibility to alter that and take from that and still be within the council's guidelines for the reserve.
Thank you.
I have just 2 or 3 things. Thank you, council members. So one of the things that I've mentioned previously, and I just want to have staff comment briefly on utilization of the open data programming that we have and data that we have. Can staff respond to how that will be utilized during this budget process?
Sure, Mayor Holman. So first, before I respond directly to your question, the budget documents will be uploaded tomorrow and available on our website. We realized today that the data files are so large that we need to break them apart and have a subpage for the budget document. So that's a disadvantage of going for a larger document. So you'll see this hopefully by mid-afternoon tomorrow afternoon. Regarding open data, we appreciate your comment, and that is that we're trying definitely to upload the budget data from now our budget system into the open data platform and make it available to the public. Our goal is to get this done definitely by Tuesday next week when we have the Finance Committee hearing, and hopefully sooner. So once we have it updated, we'll advise you.
So I just want to,
sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and open data, thank you, Alto. So open data is the platform which we use to show actual budget data for the last 2-3 fiscal years. The public can go into each department, a cost center and fund, and drill down to a much deeper level of accounting and funds budgeted than you'll see in this budget document. So that allows a different view of our data, allows comparative views from year over year. You will be able to see how salaries and benefits data went up. So if you look at, for instance, pension, it was budgeted a certain amount on the general fund for 15 fiscal year, and what's the change for 16. So this is what the data will allow the public and as well as you to look at.
If I just might add, Madam Mayor, so talking with the director, obviously it takes a lot of work by their team and everybody to get this document done. So this provides the basic information for us, and literally they just got this done this weekend. So by the time we're in with finance, my understanding is this will be on the OpenGov website. It's extremely important for us to do that. I mean, those of you who aren't aware of it, we were the first OpenGov organization at the local level. They're now all over the country, and I'm actually speaking this week to a bunch of folks about what it is that we've done around the country. I will be sure to weave in the mayor's urgent question about how quickly we're going to be getting this updated. It's a good measure of how receptive the council and the community is to having that simpler data available.
I appreciate that a great deal. And, you know, when you had been here just a little while, Jim, you took the budget on the road. And I think maybe with, you know, the upload of all the data into open data, it might be a good time to do that because we have this great tool. You're right, we were the first city to do it, and I don't think it's very well known what it is, how it can be used, even including our city council and staff. So if there's a way you can kind of work in a budget on the road with the open data utilization too, that would be great, or find some way to do some kind of, you know, tutorial or something for council and the public as well, because it's a great tool. It's wonderful, the capabilities it has. So just two quick things. In addition to that, and this is just for the Finance Committee to look at with city staff. I won't take longer than that. One is to look at beat police, especially in the downtown and California Avenue areas, if that requires like reassignments or if it requires additional staffing. You know, safety is one of the primary obligations of City Council and of the city, and so we do occasionally have issues arise, and so I'm wanting to know what it would take to get some beat police at critical hours, and you know, Dennis Burns will have some input on what those hours are. Other people will have input on what those hours might be, but to create a safer environment for us, I would really appreciate Finance taking that issue up. And then also, if we need to move forward with having a redundant power source, if we need to have some kind of budget line item to help us move that forward, look at what we might do, and if there are any sharing capabilities with other communities to do that, so we might share that source with another community as well. But let's see what we can do to move that forward. It's been several years now we've talked about it, and we really haven't made any progress in terms of implementation or creation of that. And then lastly, I was glad to hear that you have special events coordinator added back in. We had one many years ago and haven't had one for a good long time. And I know that we have some organizations and individuals that help support community events. Stanford Credit Union has been very generous in this year and in years past, but I think we need to look at also having some additional cultural events that build on, you know, healthy city priority that we have. And so I don't know if that requires any kind of line item addition or not. Depends on what kind of outside resources, private resources that have been volunteered or offered to the city. That's all I have. Vice Mayor Schmidt, your light is on. I was hoping to keep this to non-Finance Committee members because we are at 8 o'clock.
Just very quickly, I want to thank my colleagues who are not on the Finance Committee for their ideas that we can carry forward. Looking forward to the open source. One other thing, I've had a couple people come up to me and ask about when can I go to a Finance Committee hearing and hear a department budget. I think if we could make the agendas clearly available on the City Council website, and two, if we could give some notion of each agenda, how long each department discussion might be, so if people are interested in a specific department, they can have a general idea of when that might take place on what date. I think that would be very helpful as part of the reach out. So look forward to May.
Great. Thank you very much. And we have one member of the public to speak to this item. Tim Gray, you'll have 3 minutes.
I'm Tim Gray, South Palo Alto. I just wanted to offer a couple ideas on a budget process and ideas that we could engage the community a little bit more. And that is, if we could express the budget in terms of services provided to the town and communicate the value and prioritize. And right now, there's some who think that we're in a kind of a prosperous era, and maybe we shouldn't be thinking about new things to spend things on, but rather put a little bit more down payment to maybe a public safety building, which would get a little bit more cooperation from the voters if they were to, we were asked them to approve a bond measure. So if we do with a little bit less from our operating budget and put a down payment towards more of our infrastructure, then I think we could get a better cooperation from the community. And the other thing I'd like to see is a little bit more benchmarking. There's some belief that we spend a lot more administrative dollars per resident, even after you factor out the utilities, than other cities. And I'd like to really just roll the numbers out, show the community what we do spend, and either validate that or disprove that, and show how responsible we are in our spending. And I think that's a fair request, and I hope that you can generate some of these ideas within your committee structure as we roll into the budget season.
Thank you very much for your comments. And so that concludes item number 2. We move on now to agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Seeing none, we move then to city manager comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Well, in the spirit of enhanced special events, I did want to remind everybody that this Saturday, May 2nd, is the Mayfet Parade and Fair, which will begin at 10 a.m. For the history buffs, this is the 93rd annual Mayfet Children's Parade, and it starts again at 10 o'clock, as we all know, but for newcomers in the community, on University Avenue, downtown, and ends with a fair at Heritage Park. And this year's parade theme turns on no space to, with the theme of no space to alienate. I do want to thank Mayor Holman for her support this year, which included some ideas related to a number of additions to the parade that we were able to easily make. One is an expanded route to include Lytton Gardens and Channing House residents, so that the public and the kids will be walking past the senior housing. Additional music groups and student bands. Return of the Kids with Pets category for any child that wants to walk in the parade with their pet. I will note that this is not specifically limited to dogs, so I guess that could be a very interesting menagerie at the parade. And children who are not part of a specific group can also walk in the parade in the Kids on Wheels category, which is a non-motorized event. The fair at Heritage Park runs 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and is organized by the Palo Alto Recreation Foundation and the Kiwanis Club of Palo Alto, and the fair includes an array of fun children's activities, performance stage featuring local entertainment groups, lots of great food and picnic space, and more. In addition, the Museum of American Heritage, just across the street from the park, will be hosting their annual Vintage Vehicle and Family Festival with lots of activities. So we hope to see you there to celebrate. I didn't have any specific comments on Perry and where Perry will be appearing or not. I don't know if when we're all done, if the mayor wants to add to it. On my Twitter feed, I'm getting a lot of tweets about where Perry, the avatar donkey, is showing up around town and everything in response to the love of Palo Alto. Should I break real quick? Did you want to add something, Madam Mayor?
Palo Alto Perry, the real Perry, and Niner, his good friend, the real donkeys, are not trailer trained, so they will not be appearing in the parade as we had originally envisioned. But that also saves our city manager his effort of scooping, which he had offered to do.
Other duties is assigned, yes.
Which he had offered to do should they actually appear in the parade. However, Palo Alto Perry, which is a response to the challenge that, or contest, I guess you could say, that city manager put out with a $500 startup funding, Palo Alto Perry will be, after its sneak preview, his sneak preview at the Tall Tree event the other evening, he will be appearing at the parade and will be at the Heritage Park, to be sure. He'll be accepting comments. He's held saddlebags, so you can put notes in there, and Palo Alto Perry will be making his rounds around town. Just one quick addition to that. In addition to the parade route being expanded to include Lytton Gardens, Avenidas will be going to Lytton Gardens, and they'll be having a party there, a joint party, and Stevenson House will be going to Channing House to have a party there, too, as the parade route goes by there. So really happy to have them back included in those cooperations among and between the different elder homes. So thank you.
Thank you, and anybody who follows us or me on Twitter, one of the tweets I just am looking at here is from Palo Alto Perry that says, and of course this is a sort of stuffed version of Perry, I guess it's fairly big, but at the Stanford Playfest picture, they love me here. Thank you, Stanford Federal Credit Union, for taking me, Palo Alto Perry. Anyway, lots of fun. Okay, the Coverly Artist Studio program will open their working studios to the public during the annual Silicon Valley Open Studios. And this diverse group of artists of our newly relaunched Artist Residency program will show their recent and new work in progress on May 2nd and 3rd from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. 22 artists will open their studios during the Open Studio, so please try to put that on your calendar. And since it is coming up next week, just a reminder to celebrate California Avenue, which will occur on Thursday, May 7th, beginning at 2 p.m. at the plaza on California Avenue. Our staff is working with several of the merchants to plan the commemoration with music and the official launch of the fountain on the plaza, recirculating fountain, I would just like to add. We appreciate greatly the patience of the California Avenue businesses and residents and shoppers through this construction, and now it's time to celebrate. So come to the plaza and help us inaugurate the new California Avenue. I think it's pretty cool. I've been out there a number of times over the past week. And that's all I have to report, except one thing. I would say that on the mayor's comment related to the secondary transmission line, we have been working, our staff, utilities, and other members of our team directly with Stanford. It involves the Federal Energy Commission, a bunch of folks, pretty complicated. I think it probably would be in order sometime this summer for us to give an update to the council as to where we are to follow up on your comments. Thanks.
Appreciate that very much. And just one quick note is this past week, April 21st, was the 121st anniversary of Palo Alto's incorporation. So with that, that concludes city manager comments. Thank you for coming back and visiting us, although I know you don't feel well, city manager. Oral communications is our next item. We have first C. Reddy. You'll have 3 minutes, and then Don Anderson, who is speaking for 5 other people, and you'll have 10 minutes. So C. Reddy, you'll have 3.
Thanks to the City Council and the citizens of Palo Alto. Only Saturday midnight, 7,500 miles away from here, there was an earthquake in Nepal. There is a lot of lessons to be learned, and as they're doing the search and rescue at this time. So I hope someone or a team of people in Palo Alto, emergency readiness preparation teams, and people like us, individuals, families, read up on how things are happening. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned. It's a 7.9 size earthquake. The last one I was in LA was the Northridge. I was 45 miles away, and it caused a lot of devastation at what they claimed 6.9. So I would like to, I urge people to be cognizant of this, and maybe a team could go up there, volunteers and things like that, to see how we can handle it if and when and how that happens here. Thank you for that. The second thing I'm going to bring up is it's not very popular, but there is a professor by name Bo Oppenheim that I used to work at Northrop. He is an expert in the industry on lean opportunities, and he offered us, me, one time about November timeframe that he would like to help public sector as well. So if you are interested in, in the process of, putting together budgets, how we could incorporate lean, which is a big thing in the industry. A lot of people in, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and all that, they have teams of lean in doing everything. Something like zero-based budgeting and all that. We all know all these things, but I think there's new things coming up. If you want his, offering services, maybe a free 1 hour, session on that, I could facilitate that, and I'm not sure if he's going to do it for free, but thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Don Anderson, who will have 10 minutes speaking for Yolanda Ramirez, Roberto Munoz, Renee Escalante, Rosa Maria Garcia, and it looks like Mary A. Keene. You'll have 10 minutes, and the next speaker will be Gail Price. Welcome.
Thank you. Mayor Holman and honorable city council members, my name is Don Anderson. I represent the Friends of Buena Vista. Our membership includes a large list of Palo Alto community organizations, including the League of Women Voters, Palo Alto Forward, Palo Altans for Sensible Zoning, the Community Working Group, churches with congregations of Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish faiths, and many more organizations. On April 14th, you made clear your intention to approve the owner's application to close Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. The next day, April 15th, all 4 local newspapers ran headlines reading, "Council votes to close Buena Vista." This was, as you can imagine, devastating to the residents of the park. Many of them were here the night before. There's a difference between listening to 5 hours of somewhat unintelligible nitpicking among lawyers and reading those headlines the next morning. Since then, we've tried to reassure Buena Vista residents that all is not lost, that they do have friends in high places. With help from our friend Doug Kreitz and the Mid-Peninsula Media Center, we made a brief video that has now been shown to many Buena Vista residents and is continuing to be shown. And I'd like you to see it now, but I don't have a mouse. There it is. I'm guessing this doesn't count against my time.
Sometimes when you get to the very end and the very edge of something, something else will happen. And I think Councilmember Berman mentioned earlier, Supervisor Simitian mentioned that there is an $8 million amount from the county that he has brought through his colleagues in order to make that available. Our city manager has made another $8 million available. I think what we can hope is that there are others in the community, because of what has happened here last night and tonight, there are others in this community that will respond and say, this is a portion of our community that really we should look at carefully and consider, could it be safer? So I hope you will still keep hoping and talk to people. Let's hope the papers really discuss this extensively, and there may be that possibility.
Tonight, my values are pleading with me to do everything that I can to stop the closure of Buena Vista and to keep its residents in place. You all, the residents of Buena Vista, are incredibly important to the fabric of our community. I really hope this is a turning point in our community in understanding and valuing affordable housing for our neighbors.
It is important over the last 2 nights that we recognize what we have. We have a community, diverse community that is a key and important part of our city. We have the probably largest affordable housing group in the city that's critical to our future. And we're trying to address the question, how do you value that? But I think it is also important that we look at adjustments that are in our power to make about reflecting a bit of that value to the community.
That this is a safe, stable community. I mean, in the report, I think 77% of the residents have been there for 5 years or more, 45% over 10 years. And it's clearly a valuable community to the people who live there, and it's valuable to Palo Alto.
Nobody here wants to close the park, but I hope this can be the beginning of the process by which the governments and communities find a solution to this problem.
Also, when I was a teenager, I spent countless hours at Buena Vista. One of my best friends in the world, his family used to live there, and I've spent countless hours there, and I know how special a part of our community it is. And I look forward to, once we have concluded this quasi-judicial function, I look forward to engaging in further policy discussions that may relate to Buena Vista in a way that brings all parties to the table to find positive solutions.
What you have at Buena Vista is community. I think there is hope, because when we had the '89 earthquake, when there's any kind of disaster, if you look across the country, people pull together. This is an earthquake, and I think people will pull together to solve this.
And no matter how the council votes today, I think one of the things people should view that is not a vote to close the park if people uphold the hearing officer's decision, but really the beginning of how to save the park. And I know that Senator Joe Simitian, who's nice enough to grace us with his presence here both evenings, has been working hard to do that and has gotten money from the county, and I know our city manager has as well. And one of the things I'm looking forward to, frankly, is that when this is done, that we can all, as a community, come together and see how we can save Buena Vista.
So, we're grateful for your sentiments and for your commitment to save Buena Vista. We want to assert as graphically as possible that time is of the essence now for you to act on this commitment. Please imagine yourselves in the following situation. At the end of May, you're served with a notice to vacate your home no later than Thanksgiving or Christmas, or be forcibly escorted from the premises by the sheriff. In less than 3 months from the end of May, your children will start the new school year. What do? Do you wait till Thanksgiving to move? Do you sit tight because the do-gooders say there's hope? Send your children to school in Palo Alto in the fall, knowing that at most they'll be able to stay for a few months? Or do you start making plans now to leave Palo Alto? I think we all understand that no relocation package is really going to allow residents of Buena Vista to live long-term anywhere, anything like 35 miles from Palo Alto. On May 26, you will conclude your duties as judge and jury. We urge you, we implore you to be proactive between now and then. There is hope for Buena Vista. But if we're to save this community of people who have called Palo Alto home for years and in many cases for generations, we must move fast. Decisions are needed. Policy decisions that must be made immediately. Immediately means, in some cases, within minutes of your decision to approve the closure of Buena Vista. Gail Price, the next speaker, will talk about some specifics. We've held out hope to Buena Vista residents for months, for years. But to paraphrase a very old saying, some of you probably haven't ever heard of it, hope and $3.50 will buy you a cup of coffee. What's needed immediately on May 26 is action. Without immediate action, saving Buena Vista will mean, at best, saving an empty husk, not saving an established community of flesh and blood neighbors in our midst. Please use the next 30 days to prepare for swift and decisive action to save Buena Vista. As a community, for our neighbors who live there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson and Buena Vista neighbors. Our next speaker is Gail Price, and to be followed by Nicholas Martinez.
Good evening. My name is Gail Price. I'm speaking on behalf of the Community Working Group Board in support of the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park residents, their future, and all actions needed to maintain and upgrade affordable housing in Palo Alto. I'm also a neighbor and a former school board and city council member. The video illustrates your considered and heartfelt comments. The Palo Alto City Council has the power, authority, and responsibility to support the Buena Vista community and to protect affordable housing. You can demonstrate your leadership and commitment to a fair and just outcome. Thank you to District 5 Supervisor Joe Simidian and his colleagues for the recent actions on April 21st. They showed leadership and they showed a commitment to helping people. They identified processes and partners. They are in the process of doing that to preserve and operate Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. Events are quickly unfolding. The council needs to move from rhetoric to action in anticipation of the results of the county's process to forge a partnership and a solution. We recommend the following. 1, last week the County of Santa Clara added another $3.3 million for a total of $11.3 million set aside for Buena Vista acquisition. The city should follow the county's lead by allocating at least $3 million more as a match from the city's Affordable Housing Fund, in addition to the $8 million the city manager has already set aside. If a policy change is required to secure these additional funds, then change the policy. The general fund is also a potential source. 2, approve and release soon any city funds set aside for the acquisition of Buena Vista, preferably no later than May 26, when you'll meet to ratify your appeal hearings findings. 3, be prepared. Direct the appropriate city staff to do whatever advance work is necessary to ensure the city can act quickly if needed, if and when alternatives to closure materialize. 4, to secure additional resources, the City Council should actively and publicly support Supervisor Simidian's fundraising efforts by seeking out and encouraging businesses, community members, and relevant state and federal programs to help fund the preservation and upgrade of Buena Vista. As our elected officials, your deliberations and actions must reflect your commitment to Palo Alto residents, affordable housing, and economic and ethnic diversity, all that Buena Vista is and represents. You can oppose and prevent displacement by taking action. Only by doing so will you protect Palo Alto's reputation as a caring community. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker under oral communications is Nicholas Martinez.
Good evening. My name is Nicolas Martinez. I am speaking on behalf of Buena Vista residents. We want to make sure that council members are aware that Buena Vista residents are exploring all possible options and are heavily relying on the council and City of Palo Alto to do all that is within their power to preserve Buena Vista. We are extremely concerned, especially about Buena Vista children and how quickly families will have to act in order to get them into new schools by August, the latest September of this year. Time is running out, but we, the residents, are hoping for a better outcome, like the one that Supervisor Simedian is working on. But this will only happen if everyone pulls together, including our city, your city of Palo Alto. Please, highly consider our situation. We need your help. Our situation is urgent. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. That concludes oral communications. So we go now to the consent calendar. We have 4 items on consent. Looking for a motion. Councilmember Wobach.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Second. That is a motion by Councilmember Wobach with a second by Vice Mayor Schmidt to approve the consent calendar. Seeing no lights, vote on the board, please. And that motion passes 6-0, excuse me, with Councilmembers Niss, Berman, and Scharf absent.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
with your okay, I'm going to turn my seat over to Assistant City Manager Ed Shikata, if that's okay, with your permission. Thank
Absolutely, we expect you to be tracking Palo Alto Perry's activities. So our action item this evening is action item number 7, or item number 7 is the comprehensive plan update, planning process status, and review of existing comprehensive plan goals and vision statements. Welcome, staff. And Assistant City Manager, I believe this is your first presentation to council, is that right?
Okay. Yes, it is, and I've now activated the microphone, so perhaps pass the first test.
You're indoctrinated, so welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Holman, council members. I'm Hillary Gittleman, the Planning Director. And this next item is, I hope, going to be a long and fruitful discussion of the ongoing update to the city's comprehensive plan. My presentation is somewhat longer than usual, but I think there are several complex issues to talk about tonight. One is we want to give you an update on the planning process itself and spend some time on that. And then we want to continue a discussion that was started earlier this year with the council on the structure of the comprehensive plan. As we go into the update, it would be useful for us to have the council's direction and input on the overall structure of the plan. We had discussed at an earlier session the overall vision statement and themes of the comprehensive plan. Today, we're going to focus on the next level down, which is the vision statements for each of the individual chapters or elements of the plan, and then the goals and the subheadings that form the structure of those elements. Before I get into the process part of this, I wanted to say again, thank you to the council for identifying this important planning effort as one of your priorities this year. Also, thank you to the leadership group of Palo Alto citizens who have been working with us to plan the May 30th summit and the outreach efforts that will follow, and to the staff and the Planning Commission that has been working on the comp plan update for many years now. and put a lot of effort and thought into some of the materials that you're going to review this evening. I like to start every presentation on the comp plan update with a short summary of the reasons we're doing this. There are really 4 reasons that we've identified. The first is that the plan that we're working under right now, called Embracing the New Century, was adopted in 1998, and there have been changes in circumstances. The world has changed quite a bit since 1998, and it's necessary for us to update our state-required comprehensive plan, often referred to, general plans like the comp plan are often referred to as the constitution of the local jurisdictions. The second reason is that the comp plan is a function of state law, and an updated comp plan will form a sound legal foundation for future decision-making by the council and the city. The third is that an updated comp plan can help us manage growth and address some of the issues that we face and challenges we face as a community today. And the third reason is it's an opportunity for us to work together. These issues around growth and other things are potentially divisive issues, and preparing an update to the comprehensive plan provides a real opportunity for us to come together as a community and work to address, understand fully those issues, and work to identify policies and programs that will help to address them in the future. It's been a long process so far. As many of you know, the city recognized the need to update the comprehensive plan in 2006 because the current comprehensive plan was set to sunset in 2010. The work really began in earnest in 2008 with some public workshops, a lot of effort by staff, the consultants, and the Planning and Transportation Commission. And then in early 2014, the results of the Planning Commission's efforts were provided to the City Council, and the City Council directed the staff and others to start on this kind of effort to restart and reshape the process to include additional community input and consideration of the issues of the day. A key part of the restart in early 2014 was this concept that we should widely engage with the community on the issues inherent in the comprehensive plan and get them more involved in drafting the comprehensive plan update. A leadership group of Palo Alto residents was formed as a group that would aid the staff and consultants in seeking a broad input from a broad cross-section of the community. One of the main things that the leadership group has been working on is planning for the May 30th summit. We have over 300 people registered for this summit, which has clearly struck a nerve in the community. It will be an all-day event at the Mitchell Park Community Center. I hope you will all be there and join us. We plan to discuss the issues we face as a community, really start a dialogue about a collective vision for the community. It's a recruiting effort too. We want to recruit people to participate in the community work sessions that will follow the summit and build confidence in our ability to work together on some of these, again, potentially divisive issues. We've posted an agenda for the May 30th summit on our website for people who want to see how the day is organized. I invite you to look closely at that. If anyone has questions about that, they're welcome to email me or planning staff with those questions. This will continue to be fleshed out as the day gets closer, but I hope people will see reflected in this issues that they want to come and hear about and discuss and participate in at least some of the day on May 30th. So now I'd like to spend a few minutes on the process we envision after the summit. There's actually a sort of complicated diagram in the staff report, which I chose not to repeat in the PowerPoint, but there are a couple slides, or a few slides here that try to explain what we've envisioned in terms of the community and council work sessions after the summit. Up here on this slide, you'll see at the left, we see council work sessions and community work sessions really happening in parallel through the rest of this year and into early 2016. And there will be an exchange of ideas between the council and the community as they work through issues. The council, as you know, has already been working on comp plan related issues, retail preservation, growth management systems, and the like. That will not end with the summit. The council's discussion on major issues will continue, and the idea is that after the summit, the community work sessions will convene and start focusing on policy and program language consistent with the council's direction. At some point, when we've made it far enough along in that community process, a revised draft will be prepared, and that will be provided to the City Council for review, and that will be the Council's opportunity to get involved in the policy and programs that have been generated by the community work sessions. And then at the end of this process, of course, there are formal public hearings. The council and the community sessions are focusing, as I indicated, on slightly different levels in this process, and this graphic just attempts to show that the council's real priority in these early work sessions is on issues and ideas, providing direction to staff and the community members who will hopefully willingly, eagerly volunteer to participate in these sessions. The community work sessions themselves, we think, will get more into the actual policy and program language of the comprehensive plan. Even those sessions probably can't be wordsmithing sessions, but maybe policy smithing sessions. The idea is to look at policy language and see which policies and programs in the current comprehensive plan require updating, what new policies and programs need to be included, what the community work sessions generate in terms of a revised draft will be provided to the City Council, and then there will be an opportunity for the Council itself to get into the policy smithing arena and weigh in on the policy language of the plan before we produce a final list of changes for the public hearing process. This will be a cumulative process along the way, and it's going to be informed by significant public input, data, and analysis. This slide shows at the bottom of the screen some of the inputs to the process along the way. Importantly, you'll note that sometime later this summer, a draft environmental impact report and fiscal study will be available, and that would be presented to both the public, obviously, at the community work sessions, but the City Council for some substantive review and comment on the cumulative impacts and the policies and programs that will arise from the mitigation that's necessary to address those impacts. The staff report includes a possible schedule for work sessions, suggesting that the revised draft would be produced in the May-June 2016 timeframe if all of this goes according to plan. And provided there's sufficient clarity on the choices from the council and the policies and programs from the community working sessions to meet that time frame. We've always envisioned the process to be a little different than the CPAC process that was involved in the preparation and adoption of the current comprehensive plan, mostly because we're at a different stage in the process than that comprehensive plan. So much time has elapsed since the beginning of this effort in 2006 or 2008. It didn't seem like we could start all the way at the beginning again, so we've tried to design a process with that in mind. We also have a few new tools available to us since the late 90s in terms of our ability to open source data and public participation, and we want to take advantage of those new tools. The staff report does acknowledge that all along we as staff have been recommending that we don't use an appointed committee, that instead we use community outreach and engagement, really try and entice people, anyone who wants to come and participate in the community work sessions. But this is an issue, some council members have suggested that it would just be easier to get a cross-section of interest representative if the committee was appointed. And we suggest to you today that if there's going to be a change in direction and an appointment of a committee, today would be the day to make that decision, because, as I said, the summit is really a recruiting opportunity, and the summit, May 30th, is really almost here. In addition to process today, we wanted to talk about the structure of the comprehensive plan. As I mentioned earlier, at a prior evening, the council discussed the overall vision for the comprehensive plan, which is summarized on this slide. The council also discussed the themes for the existing comp plan and really talked about how these themes still ring true to a large extent, but may need to be revised to just be made a little more contemporary as we move forward. Tonight, we're seeking the same kind of overall input on the part of the comprehensive plan structure that's just a little deeper into the document. Just to review, each chapter or element of the comprehensive plan has its own vision statement. Under that vision statement is a series of goals. Then those goals are implemented by policies and programs. So that is the structure that's set up. That structure has never proposed to change. But it's important to recognize that, and what we're going to be focusing on tonight is the vision and the goals, so the highest tiers in that system. This slide just explains in more detail what those tiers are. So as we've discussed, the focus tonight is on process. It's on the vision statement for each element. We'd like to know what you think of the two versions that were included in the staff report. There's a table with columns showing the current comprehensive plan vision statements for the elements on the left-hand column, and on the right-hand column, the edited version that was recommended by the Planning and Transportation Commission. We'd like to know, again, we probably can't get into wordsmithing tonight, but we'd like to know, is there one of these two versions that you prefer? Or would you like to direct staff and the community who work on this in more detail to find to synthesize these and find some middle ground? Similarly, on the goals for each element and the headings that make up the structure, I recognize that the table providing the comparison in this case between the current comprehensive plan and the Planning and Transportation Commission's version is they're difficult to compare because the point of the Planning and Transportation Commission's input to a large extent was to reorganize the goals and the structure of the plan itself. So you can't really compare the two columns except as a whole in each of the elements. We'd like to know what you think about this structure, whether you'd like to stick with the structure of the current comp plan, whether you see some value in the direction that the Planning and Transportation Commission was heading, streamlining and clarifying that structure as is reflected in the goals and subheadings, or whether you think there should be some synthesis that provides a little easier crosswalk between the two columns. With that, I will stop talking. Just a final slide to show the next steps here. We're hoping to get some general direction from the council this evening. We'll next talk about the comprehensive plan at the May 30th summit, and immediately thereafter hope to commence these community work sessions and continue to work with the City Council through some of the issues that need to be addressed in the comprehensive plan update through the rest of the year. We also anticipate there will be periodic check-ins and again crosswalk between the council and the community sessions. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. Most of all, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on all of these issues, process and organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gittleman. And I have no cards from any members of the public, and I see no one rushing to fill out a card, so we will just bring it back to council. And council members, reminder here, as Director Gittleman said, we're not going to be looking at wordsmithing here. We're looking for vision direction to the staff. Council members, Councilmember Du Bois.
So just thinking about this session and my comments.
Could I just interrupt you just for a second here? So if we can, let's try to make our comments like in the range of 7 minutes, and then if we need to do more than one round, we can certainly do that, but so that we don't.
Took the words out of my mouth. I was personally thinking of 3 rounds. I had some general comments I wanted to keep short, and then I thought maybe if we did a round on the vision of each element and then a round on the goals, because it's kind of hard to do it all at once.
Let's certainly start with the vision and stay on the vision first.
So even before I get to the vision, I with the help of Eric, created this hierarchy of plan goals, which was at places and available to the public. And I just wanted to talk about that for a second. So I mentioned it in our last meeting on March 6th. I felt like it was important to have some kind of framework to weigh competing visions, competing goals against each other. And so this handout's kind of a straw man approach to attempt to do that. Because I think it's one of the toughest areas of the plan. You know, when you talk about controversy, it's usually where one element conflicts with another element. And so I was hoping we could have a framework like this for the summit and the working groups that would lead to a result that would make it clear kind of what trumps what when something is in conflict. And so I'd like to ask my colleagues to consider both the idea of a framework in general, and then I did propose some specifics which we can tweak. You could disagree with me. But you know, what we have here is basically 3 levels, and I grouped them into what I called existing conditions, which was the broadest thing. It's the most, I guess, fundamental to me, and it consists of basic services, things like our schools, our neighborhood character, traffic, which is existing, and community character. And then as a second priority would be new services that we're adding to the mix. Things like reducing greenhouse gases, fiber, supporting health and community. Things that are, all these things are important, as we said last time. It's really how do you weigh different categories. And then the third priority are kind of the outward-facing externalities, things that are external to the city. Again, things we'd like to do, but less important than the other two, like our brand image, our reputation, our attractiveness to outside companies to move here. So I just wanted to explain that, throw that out there for discussion. And I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, next. Council members? Don't be shy. Vice Mayor Schmidt.
Yeah, I guess the focus of the first discussion is on the visions and the structure of the visions. And I guess I'd just like to make one single point, is each of the vision statements is good. You can read it and say, this makes sense for the area discussed. The base problem I have with a comp plan, though, is they don't mesh. They don't fit together. They contradict each other. They're not in balance. Let me just give one concrete example. The land use vision statement says land use decisions shall balance our future growth needs with the preservation of our neighborhoods. Good statement. The business economic one says the city's balanced economic goals stimulate and support viable business opportunities. Good. But what happens when these two bump into each other? Well, the comp plan's very nice. In the community section, it says what to do. It says the city's Palo Alto's success will be measured by the satisfaction of its customers, the public at large. So the comp plan tells us when there's a conflict, let's turn to the public, the citizens. What do they say? Well, the citizens survey seems to be sending a clear message over the last 3 or 4 years. While things like library, police, fire, garbage collection, schools, parks, average satisfaction rates of 90%, there are 4 items that are at 50% or below: traffic, parking, land use, planning, zoning, and quality of new developments. Now, the public seems to be telling us something. Gee, these things aren't meshing, and we don't quite like the way it's coming out. So how do these issues manifest themselves? There are 3 jobs in Palo Alto for every employed resident. That's the highest ratio in the Bay Area, higher than San Francisco. We are a commuter center. And over the last 4 or 5 years, that ratio has been growing dramatically. We've added 537,000 square feet of office space. That's about 2,100 net new jobs. We've eliminated 70,000 square feet of retail space, space that the residents like. Residents, over the last 4 years, from the Census Bureau, have grown very slowly. They have a hard time measuring a growth in new households. So we're in a situation where we have been exacerbating this 3-to-1 ratio we already have. And it manifests itself in a series of problems that the people in the survey each year identify. And there's a crowning issue around this, is who pays for the problems that arise. Property tax is critical to local governments. It accounts for 32% of tax revenues for the city, and that has grown from 25 to 32 over the last 5 years. School district gets 80% or more of its funding from property tax. The county gets over 90% of its tax revenues from property tax. It funds local government. But what's happened as we grow office space, the share of non-residential contribution to property tax has fallen from 30% to 25%. So a base question, somewhere in our comp plan, we should address this issue of one, what is balanced growth? What happens when two parts of a comp plan clash with each other? How do we get popular feedback on that? And what are some of the base issues that we need to deal with? And I would assert that we should be talking about fair share. Fair share in growth, who grows, fair share in where the general fund money gets spent to foster and help that balanced growth take place. And that the rapidly growing and prosperous business community in town pay their fair share. So that's what I think our comp plan discussion, the types of issues that the comp plan discussion should deal with.
Councilmember Filseth.
Okay, thanks very much. I think there's a lot of good stuff in the comp plan that as it is right now. One of the things that we're sort of talking about here is what do we do when there's, sort of conflict between comp plan says this over here and that over there, and what do we do when these things sort of appear to conflict with each other? Okay, and I think, something like this is a tool to help us resolve that, right? Because if we agree on sort of the buckets of priorities, that can give us some guidance on how to resolve these kind of things. Because if you look at the introduction to the comp plan right now, I mean, there's 7 major themes, right? And as with what we have, as with the 5 here on vision, there's not a lot of guidance on, as Councilmember Schmidt and Du Bois said, okay, so how do we resolve that, right? I actually think there is a lot of that in the details of the comp plan as written. So if you really weed through the detailed policies and programs in the comp plan, I think there is quite a bit of guidance on how to resolve those things when they say, you know, we've had a lot of discussion about parking, is that, you know, neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods should be protected from the impacts of commercial parking and so forth. I mean, that's prioritization and guidance, but you got to go really, really low level into the details of the plan in order to weed that stuff out. And that's one of my concerns about sort of the work that's been done in this. And I think, you know, this is a starting point that we need to work on, is I think some of that has got lost, you know, in sort of some of the proposals in here, right? And I think, you know, we need to make sure that doesn't go away. So another piece of this that I want to propose, and I'll try to keep this in a few minutes instead of 20 or something like that, is that another aspect of this that I think will help us address sort of what are we doing when this conflicts with that and so forth, is I think there's an essential idea of how much, okay? Because we say, for example, let's say we want to have more, you know, more shuttle services in town. What priority should that have? Well, it makes a big difference whether we're talking about sort of that much or that much, right? Because all of those are going to have trade-offs, right? And we're going to have to trade off something here for something there. And the comp plan per se doesn't give us a lot of guidance on how to do that, right? And I think that it would be really helpful to have a quantitative view of those kinds of trade-offs. You know, if we take X much of this, what do we have to give up in terms of Y much of that? And in particular, I think it would be desirable to be able to project as part of policy discussions, you know, to at least analyze and talk about how will city growth in the long term affect future demand for city services, okay? And so I passed out, so this is my stack of paper here, but I've been working on a model to do that, and I passed out a first pass, and it's very simple. I really want to, it's an approach, and I apologize for dragging people through a gearhead thing here, but I think this can help. I've parameterized it to let people try different growth rates and see the impact on initially 3 city services: park space, commute traffic, and water use, and I will talk about schools in a little while. I want to do this to support discussion. It doesn't replace EIR or CEQA or things that are appropriate for, you know, that are much more accurate, but sort of a high-level discussion. And let me just briefly comment on how this works, and it'll be in public domain and so forth. It's intended to be distributed electronically. PASS would like to put it on their website. So this is divided into 2 sections: growth drivers and major city services. The 2 main growth drivers I looked at were jobs growth, ultimately, which comes from the business registry, I hope, and housing growth, which in the long term has been very low, but recently has been 1% or more a year. And if you look at the spreadsheet attached, or actually the first page, you know, currently we have, the 2015 numbers are actuals. Currently we have about 90,000 jobs in Palo Alto, give or take some, about 27,000 housing units. I've tried to get the best numbers I could. Most of these are from city documents, existing, draft existing condition reports, some from ABAG, right? If jobs grow 1% a year, then in 30 years we'll have 120,000 jobs. If housing units grow at the same rate, then in 30 years we'll have 36,000 housing units. So the intent is that the yellow boxes are sort of knobs to twist and see the impact on demand for other kinds of services. So for example, the yellow boxes are knobs to twist, the pink boxes are sort of major results. So let me just briefly stop. If you look at line 9, jobs housing ratios currently about 3.3, right? If both jobs and housing units grow at the same rate, then in 30 years it'll still be 3.3, right? Population of Palo Alto is about 66,000 right now. At 1% growth per year in 30 years, it'll be about 89,000. Okay? So let me look at services for a second. Second section is divided into 3 categories, and let me just do the simple one, which is park space. So if you look at in-town park space, today we have about 175 acres of in-town park space. That's a ratio of about 2.65 acres per 1,000 Palo Alto residents. Now, the comp plan actually says we should have 3 to 4 acres of park space per 1,000 residents, okay? But as of today, we have about 2.65. If the city's population increases 1% per year over 30 years, then in order to keep 2.65 acres per 1,000 residents in 30 years, we'll need 236 acres of park space, or 61 acres more than we have now. Suppose we decide that, you know, we'd like to support faster housing growth in order to reduce the jobs housing ratio, okay? So let's say we targeted 1.5% per year housing to the extent that governments can target this stuff instead of 1%. In 30 years, if we did that, we'd have 103,000 people living here for the same 121,000 jobs, assuming jobs grew 1% per year. That would bring the jobs housing ratio down to under 3, under 2.9. On the other hand, to keep 2.65 acres of park space per resident, we'd now need 99 new acres of park space instead of 61. Okay? Land's pretty expensive around Palo Alto. So we might decide that instead of 2.65 acres for park space per resident, maybe we ought to target 1.75 acres of park space per resident, or per 1,000 residents instead. In that case, we wouldn't need any more park space. Is that a good idea? You can't tell from this, but it's the kind of discussion we ought to have, right? If we do decide we want 1.75 acres of park space per 1,000 residents, then the comp plan shouldn't say 4 acres anymore, right? So this is the kind of discussion I think we ought to have. I've taken a whack at 2 other services, which I won't spend time talking about. Traffic is incredibly complicated to do. The real answer to that is have the EIR do it. I tried to do a really simple model that looked at alternative transportation and job growth. Water is self-explanatory. I also did some modeling, which is not in here, relative to school considerations, which is obviously a huge priority for a lot of Palo Alto residents. Some people have seen some of this. It's not in this version. State law places some restriction on how school issues are to be treated in municipal considerations. And before this goes into this, I want to make sure that whatever we do is done properly. Again, this is designed so that people can plug in their own numbers and extend to their own services, right? To try to look at these kinds of discussions. So I hope this will be a useful part of the discussion, right? As we figure out how to trade off this versus that. I don't know that it needs to be part of the comp plan. I think it ought to be part of the discussion. If people have better models, we ought to do that. But I think having both a values-based component to this and a quantitative component is going to make it a much better discussion. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Filseth. So, Councilmember Burt, Councilmember Wobach. Oh, there you go, Councilmember Burt.
So had we agreed on what we were going to do in each of these rounds, or was that just Councilmember Du Bois's proposal, or what? Or is it left open?
Well, what we're trying to do, and Director Gittleman will chime in here if...
No, but within each round is what I'm
within each round, you know, you can say anything that you want to, having to do with how you think the discussion ought to be focused on, and how we get to commenting on the vision statements.
All right.
So if there are different considerations or different framings of the statements, then have at it.
Well, let me go to a few other comments before going into vision statement comments, either this round or next one. First, I just wanted to respond to a couple of things that Director Gittleman said. I do think that we want to give consideration to the process, and whether this, the staff proposal to have kind of this community-wide discussion and somehow figure out how to channel that is going to be the most productive way to get to where we need to go. And, but I would clarify that those of us who have been struggling and talking about something different from that, first, it wasn't instead of a community-wide discussion, it was in conjunction with it. And second, we weren't proposing it, or I wasn't, because it would be easier, but because it might be more effective and productive. And then when we do get into discussion on the vision, I don't plan to feel constrained by either saying either or which of the Planning Commission or the old plan I want the staff to go to. I don't think we'll have time or this the occasion to do final wordsmithing, but I do plan to talk about words because they're very impactful, especially in a more concise vision statement. They mean a lot. I also wanted to respond to the issue that Vice Mayor Schmidt had brought up about looking at our trends in where revenue comes from and trying to make sure that we have, basically we maintain what had been an historic ratio of revenue coming, how much should come from residents and businesses, and we may not have a precise notion of that, but I think it is important. I'll just wait. So I think it is important that we do examine that, but I would want to differ in that I don't think the problem with business property tax is the new development, as much as that new development may have other problems. The problem is existing development that changes hands and doesn't get reappraised. I just want to make sure we're talking to each other here a lot, so it's a conversation of 6 of us, so I'm trying to talk to my colleagues, so I want to make sure that we're all thinking. So I don't think it's a correct assumption that from a purely the revenue from property tax, it's the new development that's the problem. It's the existing development not being reappraised at the same rate that residential is. Now I want to talk about this issue of conflicts in the comprehensive plan between different sections and the wording that's there. And I do think that, having some frameworks for discussion are helpful. Maybe there's a way to even put them within the comp plan. But overall, I think that we need to look at the wording of these different visions and goals and reconcile the wording. I mean, that's what the task is before us. And whether it be in the example of the business section versus the land use section, and some degree of a contradiction because the emphasis in the land use is a balance between residents and business interests with an assurance that we wouldn't be degrading the residential component, and the business component doesn't have that. We can fix that with words. So I think we need to look at those words and tackle those issues. I also wanted to make sure that there's an understanding that Councilmember Phil Smith said, for instance, in the existing comp plan, that we should have a certain amount of parks according to the comp plan. And that's not what the comp plan intended when it established goals. And I know this because I had this argument 17 years ago when that comp plan was being adopted on what it should mean. And it was explained in detail at the time that, no, these were goals and not mandates. And if we want to establish something as a mandate, then we need to have that clarity. We also should have clarity on what we mean by a goal. And that was, I do think that's overly ambiguous, that different people understand the intention of a goal differently, and we don't do a very good job of explaining what we actually mean. So that alone, kind of a definition of what's a goal, what's the consequence of a goal, I think is something that's missing from our current comp plan and leads to confusion. And then there's also this, I did want to ask staff, there's been reference, and it's happened a number of times at recent council meetings, of jobs housing, and this document talks about a jobs housing ratio. Is jobs housing normally spoken of in terms of number of jobs versus number of housing units?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Byrd. There are two ways to look at it. One way is to look simply at housing and jobs, but a more refined way that I am used to seeing it is a comparison between jobs and employed residents.
That's my understanding, the way that I've always seen it used. So I think we have to be careful with nomenclature, because if we take from one area an intention that is meaning something, and then we turn it into something else and compare the two, that's not a proper comparison. So once again, clarity in our words and our definitions is critical, because otherwise we can kind of move things all different directions. So I think I'll leave it there for right now. Let me just, sorry, I'm gonna check a couple more notes. Well, I'll say also at a broader level, tonight we're going to talk about comparing visions and goals. We didn't have before us laid out the goals of the old comp plan and the PTC recommendation, and for that matter, any other directions on goals that fairly recent council policies have informed an intention on new goals, and putting them side by side, somewhat similar to what we have in vision here. And I think that's the way that we'd have a more productive discussion. I couldn't go back and look at the old comp plan and create those tables. So I've gone to the Planning and Transportation Commission version under goals and looked at those. But frankly, when I talk to that, I don't know in each case how that goal compares to the goals in the current comp plan. So I'll be speaking to the Planning and Transportation Commission draft, and I won't be speaking to the old comp plan, but I think it'd be relevant to be speaking to both. And I'll also say at a high level on the organization of the plan. So we talked about vision, but there's also even a higher level is the organization of the plan. I mentioned previously, I think that it's just an odd marriage of orphans to put safety and environment in the same chapter. They each needed to have a place, and they got thrown together, and nobody's been able to explain to me why they're in the same chapter under the new comp plan. I think they should be separated. If there's no rational reason other than that they don't have a home elsewhere, I don't think that's a good way to organize it. And then we have at the back a concept plan for East Meadow and Fabian Way, and one of the things that I'll want to see reflected, at least in goals, if not visions, and maybe there's a way to do it in both, is a greater intention to utilize concept plans, or as we've called them in our prior comp plan, coordinated area plans, as a really valuable and critical planning tool going forward in this new comp plan. And I don't see it yet reflected in the text. I also have a question on the landscape element, which section that should really belong in. Is it a natural environment, or is it part of land use? And not sure, I want to raise this. I'd like to see it become more a question of natural environment, rather than the historic, that it's probably more of our unnatural land use. So those are my initial comments.
Councilmember Wobach.
Okay, so since it looks like this round, we aren't just focusing on one thing or another, I'll mention it.
Let's really do try to keep focused on the vision statements.
Okay, well, I'm going to say just one thing about process going forward. I know we'll talk more about that as well, but I just want to have one kind of initial statement about that. Also, just a couple comments about the vision statements, and also a couple of my thoughts on the comments I've already heard just now from my colleagues. On process, I think it is important that we do have, meetings in the community, you know, primers on urban design, community planning, architecture, transportation, to provide kind of an introductory level of public education, engagement, and discussion. You know, our Palo Alto meetings that we had last year, I think were a start down that direction. We've had a number of meetings like that over the last few months, convened by groups like Palo Alto Forward, but not as much by the city. I want to echo what Councilmember Burt said, that having more community engagement following the comp plan or following the summit, just because of where we are in the timeline, or I was hoping to have more prior, is not in conflict with, or you're doing that and having, you know, an appointed committee is not in conflict with having the open source discussions. I do think it's important that we have a good level of public education throughout this, and I do think that having an appointed committee would be very useful. You know, a group that can work together, bring together diverse viewpoints, diverse experiences, but work together on an ongoing basis and explore these issues as a group, in addition to the, as you put it, the open source input that we can gather along the way. On the idea of, you know, having a quantitative aspect that Councilmember Phil Seth brought up, I actually really agree. I'm also not sure how much of that should be done. It needs to be articulated in that way in the comp plan, but I'm not sure how I feel because I just had a chance to look at it at the model. But as Councilmember Phil Seth said, this is a first stab at it. You know, so I actually really appreciate that effort and that attempt to start thinking quantitatively. So I think that's a good start to you know, to thinking about how much we want of different things and what kinds of ratios we want. And Councilmember Burt's responses and critiques, I think Councilmember Phil Seth will be very open to. So I appreciate both of those comments. Just a couple of things, and perhaps this is getting into wordsmithing, but I'll just mention a couple of words that I didn't see in these vision statements that I think maybe we should. Under natural environment element, I don't see the word wildlife, and I don't think it would hurt to add that. Under the transportation element, I'm looking for things like flexible, dynamic, anything about performance measures or alternatives to driving for all. Not just that we have a system for drivers and a system for bikers and a system for people who take the bus, but that there are systems or multiple parallel systems which everybody would be able to utilize. But I do think that something about performance measures is worth mentioning. I'm not sure if it needs to be here in the vision statement, but I think the performance measures are very important and should be an important tool for us moving forward in our comp plan. I also want to echo Councilmember Burt's comments about having concept plans or coordinated area plans be, again, a tool that perhaps we learn to use more efficiently. Again, you're looking at the model of our next door neighbor to the southeast of Mountain View that has a very large number of precise plans. And I don't think that that's something we should shy away from doing. I think that that's a good way to figure out what works in different parts of the community. Those are my comments for now.
So I'll make a few comments at this juncture. I think it is important that we have some kind of tool like what Councilmember Philseth brought forward. I don't know how we integrate it at this point in time in this discussion tonight, but I do think it's important to have that discussion, have some kind of a backdrop behind or in front of which we consider where we're going as a community. So I appreciate your bringing that forward. having to do with the vision statements, excuse me, having to do with the vision statements in the comp plan, a broad statement here, very broad statement. I find that the Planning and Transportation Commission recommendations, while it's clear that there's been a lot of effort put towards them, and this is not 201, but generally speaking, I find them to be diluted to such an extent that they don't provide much in vision. They're so high level that I don't find them giving guidance as to what the vision should then create in terms of policies and goals and policies. There are some things that I find, Councilmember Wolbach said in the natural environment he didn't find wildlife. The word I had put down was habitat. The Planning and Transportation Commission did mention habitat, but so let's just say in natural environment, it's habitat, urban forest is referenced. Urban forest, I think, is a fine way to put it, but I also would like to see, I guess I'd be integrating that more into land use, but you can decide where it should go. I really want to see more canopy integrated into our built environment. So having the vantage point, that's just as an aside here, having the vantage point of 7th floor pretty much every day, I look out and I see buildings that are solid buildings and don't have breaks in them really interrupt our canopy. So that interrupts our urban forest. So I think that's something that we ought to talk about as a vision. In terms of transportation, I appreciate the Planning and Transportation Commission adding a reduction of greenhouse gases as a goal. But I think there's much in the existing comp plan language that is absolutely relevant. There are pieces of it that I think we're past, like the 10% alternative transportation methods. So there's some of it that's a little dated, but I think the goals there that are stated as vision, I think, are still viable and meaningful. Land use and community design. We have a lot of conversation about community design these days, and I'm happy to have that conversation. So when I look at the comprehensive plan, in the introduction section, and this is a question too, we're looking at vision statements here, but we don't have information about what's happening with the vision statements. So when I look at pages I2 and I3, or in other words, pages 2 and 3 of the introductions of the comprehensive plan, there's some very good language there. Very good language there that I think ought to be transferred. I'm happy for it to stay here, but it also isn't integrated into any of the vision statements, either current or Planning Commission ones. So, Palo Alto's diverse neighborhoods are the building blocks of the community. I think that's strong and good. The city is committed to build upon the strengths of its neighborhoods and maintaining a distinct identity for each neighborhood. Those kinds of comments, I think, are great vision statements. The community treasures the special qualities of the city, including its historic buildings, pedestrian scale, high-quality architecture, and beautiful streets and parks. Maintaining the physical qualities of the city is an overarching consideration incorporated into all parts of the plan. And I think that language is visionary. We talk about, in the vision statements, both current and Planning Commission recommendations, we talk about where we're headed, mostly. We don't talk so much about where we are. We do some, but I think not enough, where we are, what we're building upon. And I think that's an important piece that ought to be better integrated. Some things that I think aren't mentioned. Habitat is mentioned, canopy. I'd made some notes previously. The built environment, I think, so under community design, I think we have a fair amount of work to do there, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. We don't talk about animal services in terms of some of the community services and facilities element. That's something the community has absolutely said that we want to keep here, and we're working on how best to do that, but it's not mentioned at all, and I think it is a community value. We don't talk much about cultural activities. So we kind of seem to have gone from art and culture to art and science. And I don't know why we can't have art, culture, and science. They aren't mutually exclusive of each other. I agree with, in terms of process, I agree with comments that have been made previously about, and you've heard me say this before, it will be no surprise, about having a committee that is a consistent body that works through the comp plan, a body of people that can get more informed, and some people will be already informed pretty closely and intimately what the comp plan is, what land use is, what transportation is, what our community services are, a diverse range of people, but really, as I've called it before, a sleeves rolled up, informed group of people to help guide this. The group of people that we have currently participating in the comp plan process is really an outreach group, and that's fine, well and good, but I do think there needs to be this other body, as other people have referenced. So that's my 7 minutes. Councilmember Du Bois. And by the way, we should at some point get to, where are we here time-wise? We are an hour into this. So at some point, I am going to look to motions so that if we can get clarification on some of these vision statements, so that staff has a really clear notion of where we're headed. Again, we're not wordsmithing, we're talking about vision. So to give clear guidance to staff. Councilmember Du Bois.
Excuse me, Mayor Holman, if I can just interject after there's been one round, I just wanted to comment on a few of the council's suggestions.
Absolutely.
Just starting from the end there, if we are going to have an appointed committee to get that kind of consistent participation that a couple of you have mentioned, I think staff would really like your help in defining the charter of that group. I mean, are we talking about a CPAC type process starting with a whole series of educational forums, really ground zero, or are we building on some of the work that's been done already, trying to take advantage of the work that this council has done in the last few months on the issues, and some of the work that the Planning Commission has done with public input along the way on the goals, policies, and programs. So that would be very helpful. Also, a great observation about the language, the really strong language in the themes in the introduction. Certainly there would be a way to incorporate that into some of the vision statements throughout the book. Let's see, the idea of the kind of quantitative look at the issues, I think, is really important one, and as we start to get the results of the draft DIR analysis and the fiscal analysis, I think we're going to be able to give the council and the community some more ability to do this in a more refined way, and hopefully that we can work with you, those of you who are interested in it, in finding a way to really make it a useful tool in defining choices. We won't have all of the quantitative information in time for the summit, but the summit really is intended to be a discussion where we start to talk about some of these trade-offs and issues that we face. We want to get beyond just, it's got to be this way or it's got to be that way, and really talk about these ideas and how they relate to each other with some richness in the discussion. Then there was a couple of references to coordinated area plans, and I just wanted to clarify that the concept plans for East Meadow Circle and the California Avenue area are really policy and goal kind of plans, so they don't get to the level of detail as a coordinated area plan. I expect, as I hear many of you do, that the updated comprehensive plan will include policies and programs, implementation programs, calling for more detailed planning. In Mountain View called precise plans, here called coordinated area plans. In the state law, they're called specific plans. But I do think that we've heard that from the community and from the council on several occasions, and expect that that will be something we see developed further in the comprehensive plan update. With that, I'll stop, and happy, of course, to hear more comments and suggestions.
Councilmember Du Bois.
Thank you. It's a good round one. Thank you for taking all those notes. So you asked a few items, I guess I'll react to, and then I'll get into visions. So the idea of open source community versus standard community, I guess I'd be willing to try the open source community if we could have some very strong incentives to get people to come to all the meetings so that we'd have continuity. And so I think it's really worth some thinking. We have over 300 people currently signed up for the summit. I mean, you know, how can we keep that number up? And maybe it's going to be impossible, but I think that's a really good goal. And maybe if we agree to try the open source system and we don't see enough consistency, maybe we have to figure out how to readjust mid-course. So it's like, let's try it, but if it's not working, let's not keep going. You also asked a question about whether we should expand the period of time for community input. I think we need to allow flexibility based on feedback, and I'd really like to see us be quality-driven instead of time-driven. And that can be hard to measure, I agree, but again, rather than see us locked into a schedule, I think we need to listen to the community. And I do think we should consider additional tools for community input. Again, I'll make a plug for some kind of online weighting tool for the goals, forcing people to make trade-offs, maybe allocating points. And ideally, if we could collect that data by neighborhood, I think it'd be really interesting to see how people are weighing in on the vision for the whole city by neighborhood. And then something like Eric's quantitative impact tool, same thing. If we could put that online, I think we need to make it very clear what the assumptions are, so it's not just a black box, because then I think it'll just cause more questions. And if we do these online kind of things, I really think we need to leverage all the online sources in Palo Alto, including promoting it on Palo Alto Online, Facebook, not just the city website. All right, so I'm going to get specific. One quick question, housing wasn't included. I guess the assumption was we just did the housing element, so we didn't include it.
That's right, although the council has identified one of the issues that we'll be talking about is whether there are adjustments that we want to make in the housing element sites and densities.
Right, it's one of the 3 sessions at the summit, but it's not in the discussions.
We weren't going to do the same kind of in-depth review of goals, policies, and programs because that was just done.
Right. All right, so starting on page 149 of the packet, which is the visions, I'll be very specific in my opinion. On the land use, I prefer the current comp plan. I think it's clearer. I think what Mayor Holman said, that some of these things are diluted down, and they also use a lot of buzzwords that I think we should speak with clear language when we can. So I like how it calls out specific uses, neighborhoods, shopping, employment centers. The PTC statement just says, we'll balance growth with preservation of neighborhoods. That seemed more unclear to me than the current plan, which says all neighborhoods will be improved. On the transportation, I actually like the PTC version, but I'd like to include the sentence about the adverse impacts of automobile traffic on residential streets in particular will be reduced. So again, that's a very specific sentence that I would like to add to the PTC's vision.
Councilmember Du Bois, if I can interrupt. Are you picking up a sentence? I'm trying to track. Are you picking up a sentence from the existing, or are you adding a new
I'm picking it from existing and adding it to the PTC.
Okay, so about midway down is the adverse impacts.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And Hillary, if you're not following me, let me know.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't get it, but staff is here.
Okay.
One of us will get it.
Okay. On the community services, I like the current language. I particularly like measuring success through customer satisfaction, which is missing from the update. On the natural environment, again, I like the current comprehensive plan language. I think it makes it clear that there are two things, the open space and parks versus the urban forest. I think the new language kind of blends the two. And the new language doesn't have anything about conservation, either in the vision or the goals. And the current language mentions conservation several times. And then in the business element, again, I actually like the PTC version here, but I would like to include a sentence again in the middle of the current plan that makes it clear that the competing needs of residents and businesses will be balanced so that neighborhoods are protected, and the rest of that sentence. So again, I think that kind of clarity is good, and I think a lot of that got kind of diluted out. And I'm going to keep it short. I hope we have to do a third round where I'll go into the goals. So, thanks.
Council members, another? Councilmember Burt. And Councilmember Du Bois, you went through some of those. You could have been making motions, or maybe you're just getting out there what your intentions are. So, Councilmember.
I'd like to get them out and hear everybody.
Okay, Councilmember Burt.
Well, first, I concur with a number of Councilmember Du Bois's comments. Although, at the same time, I want to move in a direction of a more concise set of vision statements than the old comp plan. Excuse me. So I think we have to try and figure out a way to do that. Some of Councilmember Du Bois favored the more concise on the Planning Commission, and some with a few inserts, which I think are well-chosen additional sentences, or themes, I should say, because we may find ways to take those same sentences and make them more concise. Excuse me. I also think we need to have a little more discussion on what Mayor Holman brought up about the purposes of the introductions. So the introductions are not the vision statement, but they illuminate the vision statements. And so they're really auxiliaries to those. We really haven't given much discussion about that. So for instance, under land use, I have some problems with the current statement, and aside from its length, but there are things in here, fifth, sixth line down. It says the diverse range of housing and work environments, it says, will be sustained and expanded to create more choices for all income levels. I'm always cautious about will be, and that kind of absolute statement that is not something that we necessarily live up to. If we want to say that it's our intention or our goal, then we should describe it as that. But even over on the PTC side, there's just some things that I'll give as example that are either redundancy or other surplus language, and then give an example. So it says Palo Alto's land use decisions shall balance our future growth. Well, our future is, to me, redundant. The growth is future. And it's not about growth needs necessarily. So I would simply say growth. And there's an implication there by stating needs that whatever growth we have is the growth we needed. And then with the preservation of our neighborhoods, address climate protection priorities. Well, I think that should be more broad, which would be environmental priorities. And then focus on sustainable development near neighborhood services. Well, I would say sustainable development near services, period. And And then in the transportation element, I was struggling with whether the description of this over on the PTC side, whether a sustainable network of safe, accessible, and efficient transportation, whether network adequately describes what we're envisioning, and it may, because I really want to look at the assuring that we have that both the diversity of modes and integration of an integrated system, I should say. And then on the 6th line down, we talk about enhancing the quality of life in Palo Alto neighborhoods. Well, I think we actually want to do it citywide. As much as neighborhoods are important, I don't want to limit it to neighborhoods. And then in the community services section, I haven't really reconciled the old comp plan vision statement versus the PTC, but under the PTC side, I would just drop the this generation must. The last generation must have too, and the one after this must. I just say invest in the people and places and programs. And if we want to make a stronger statement, then make a stronger statement, but not the lofty language. Under natural environment, we talk about preserving our ecosystems. I wonder whether we should be also talking about restoring. Because if we've destroyed something, do we just want to preserve whatever it is we destroyed or damaged? I do think that ecosystems and habitat adequately address the issue of wildlife. And then further down, we talk about water quality. And we no longer just talking about quality of our water, we're talking about quantity. And so I'd really want to look here and in the goals about a sustainable water supply. I think that is what really captures where we're trying to head. And then down on the second to last line, we talk about a plan for climate change mitigation. But under natural environment, we certainly have our climate protection initiative as well as our mitigation or adaptation, which is really, adaptation is probably the term that we're, I guess that's what they're meaning by mitigation here. And also it talks about a plan, but I'd rather have implementation than a plan. We need both, but just having, I think we need to speak about what we're going to do and not just what we're going to plan. And then on the final, on the business, under the old one, it says Palo Alto's business environment will be exciting. Well, I think we're really talking about continuation of what we have in our dynamic business environment, not creating one. So I would add continue to or something to that effect. But I thought the Planning Commission one was more succinct and good, but would be better with the addition of the sentence that Councilmember Du Bois suggested we inject from the old plan. So I'm also concerned on how we're going to be able to get through all the goals, because as I went through them, I have one comment or another on a majority of the goals. And so that's a longer discussion. I don't see how we're going to get through that tonight. So we probably are going to need to talk about how we're going to talk about them.
So Vice Mayor Schmidt next, and it would be helpful if pretty soon we had some motions put on the floor to help guide the rest of this discussion. Otherwise, we'll have to go get another round to do motion and discussion on the motions. So, Vice Mayor Schmidt.
Yeah, I guess our goal is not to get into word smithing of each item. I do like several general comments, Mayor Holman, pointed to the theme part of the report as articulating very well general statements, and I think to capture some of that language. I like some of the comments supporting the more focused wording that comes out of the PTC, especially on transportation, community services, and natural environment, but without losing some of the critical statements that people have identified. From my perspective, though, I want to keep note that we're not just approving statements that have been here for 2 decades now, but dealing with some of the issues that have arisen from them. And from the comments I've heard from my colleagues, I think there are 4 things that jump out at me. How do we deal with conflicts when we find that 2 of the statements in practice run into each other? How do we prioritize a response to those impacts? So maybe some kind of overarching statement on that. Number 2, I think a number of people have made the point that quantification of impacts, measurements of impacts, is very valuable and focuses attention very clearly. Now, I don't know whether that belongs in the vision statements, but I think it is something that many of us keep coming back to. The third element is, who do we expect as the judge of conflict, of how we're doing, of prioritizing? And the current comp plan seems to state clearly that the public is the key judge of whether things are successful. So how do we get that type of language in there clearly stated of what the appeals would be when there's a conflict? And finally, I think the word balance appears in virtually all of the statements. So how do we measure impacts? How do we look at growth? How do we look at who pays, who benefits? How do we share cost of adjustment to things? So I think those are overarching issues that cross the boundaries of the vision statements, but it's something anyone trying to work with the vision statements over time keeps coming back to. And so is there some general guidance we can provide to users of the comp plan?
Councilmember Wolbach.
So I'm not sure it's quite time to make motions, but I wanted to ask Planning Director Gittleman, are you looking for motions relating to the vision statements, or is listening to our discussion adequate feedback for you to continue to work on crafting those or coming back with a different vision?
Well, thank you, Councilmember Wolbach. We certainly don't need a motion. I think what I'm hearing from the council is a very thoughtful kind of weighing of and blending of the two, maybe choosing, in the case of different elements, choosing a different column as a starting place and weaving some of the thoughts from the other column in as necessary. If you agree that that's really what you think is the right approach here, we certainly don't need that in the motion. That seems very, very clear, but I'll leave that up to you.
Okay. One thing I just want to thank, I believe it was Councilmember Du Bois pointing out the line under transportation element from the old comp plan, that the adverse impacts of automobile traffic on the environment in general and residential streets in particular will be reduced. I'd mentioned wanting something about performance measures, and I think those, our sentiments, I think, are shared there. And combine that also with Councilmember Filseth's emphasis on having something quantifiable. And I think that's one that's really worth highlighting, bringing over either verbatim or, as Councilmember Burt suggested might be possible, capturing that objective, even if not using the exact language. I do think that there seems to be a consensus that we would like to see a committee, a consistent committee that works together as a group, as a body, through the comp plan process. I see a couple of options for how that could happen. There may be others. So before we make motions, I'd like to hear my colleagues' thoughts on that, as well as any staff thoughts. But a couple of options would be to recruit that from the summit. Say, you're here at the summit. That's a great sign that you're involved and interested. We're going to have more meetings over the next several months, and we encourage everybody to come back. But we're also looking for really committed people who can engage in a really deep way on an ongoing basis, who can make that commitment. Another way to do it might be to take our existing leadership team for the comp plan, which, as Mayor Holman pointed out, has generally been kind of an outreach team, but it's been called a leadership team. We could consider repurposing them to be less focused on outreach and more focused on transitioning their role to be the core of that committee. So those are a couple of ways we might go about getting a committee rolling. I think we're going to have a motion before we leave tonight calling for a committee to be created. Those are a couple ways to do it. I leave it open to colleagues to suggest how we should do that. Also, on just this general question of being concise or being prescriptive, it was mentioned earlier that the comp plan is kind of the constitution for the city. The U.S. Constitution is a model in brevity. So I would just, I would keep that in mind before we get too prescriptive in our comp plan.
Councilmember Filseth?
I just have a couple of observations on this, and I don't want to add too much to what's been said already. I think, we sort of said, we're not going to wordsmith this, but we are kind of wordsmithing it a little bit, I actually don't know that that's a terribly bad thing. I mean, we're the council, we're supposed to be responsible for vision, and this is kind of vision stuff. This is the kind of stuff that we should get involved in. So I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing to have people on the council trying to do what Councilmember Du Bois and Councilmember Burt were doing, and sort of trying to pick out words from this and make sure it's right. I don't think we should outsource it to, some other group, especially this part. Maybe other pieces, okay? When we get into detailed programs and stuff like that, I don't know. But sort of the high-level vision stuff, I think, we need to keep very, very, very closely tied into this. So I was going to ask a question, how do we resolve this, right? How do we do the final edit on this, right? I'm not sure, right? I see us sort of grappling with sort of the original language on these things, which is wordier versus the PTC's wording, which is simpler, but I do agree with the people who've spoken before that said it. I think that the brief versions have lost quite a bit from the original version. So I think we need to be pretty judicious in this. The one comment I would make on, it really applies to the land use decision. And when Councilmember Burt was talking about sort of the words of growth needs and so forth, I think we need to be really careful to distinguish, what are policy choices versus environmental things that are going to happen to us. And, particularly with the issue relative to growth. I mean, growth growth is a policy choice, okay? I mean, there's people that say, you know, it's just going to happen to us and we have to mitigate it, right? But actually, you know, it's impacted by choices we make in terms of zoning and planning and stuff like that. And so at that level, it's a policy choice. And so I think, you know, the language in here, the revised language sort of, you know, sort of doesn't, I mean, it sort of seems like it's going to happen to us, right? And I think actually it's something we need to control, right? There's a difference between stopping it and managing it, okay? I think we need to recognize that this kind of stuff is stuff we manage, right? So that's my 2 bits on that point. And I'll stop there.
So I'll start with a simple motion, which is having to do with the working group, I'll call it, having to do with the comp plan discussion. I don't think it should be the same group that is the current leadership group, because they were chosen for very different reasons, not expertise or familiarity with the comp plan. So I'll look for suggestions from colleagues about how it's chosen, but I will move that a working group will be formed to work through the comprehensive plan for the duration of the process.
I'll second it.
And we'll need to see the motion on our screens here if we can.
Excuse me, Mayor Holman?
Yes.
Maybe the council wants to think carefully about how it wants to structure that committee in terms of the Brown Act process. If the council sets up the committee, then it will be a formal Brown Act body and it will require noticing, and it needs to have agendas and meet in public. If a committee that's formed and appointed by the city manager to advise him has more flexibility, and I think recently almost all of those committees have indeed been open door committees that have invited participation and attendance, but they are not required to follow all of the formalities of a Brown Act body.
So having to do with that, yes. Having to do with that, council members, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think council members could make recommendations. I think council members could make recommendations to the city manager, and he could select from the recommendations from the council. And then the other thing that we could sort of adjust that process with is, even though the committee could be, the working group would be advisory to the city manager as opposed to the council, if that's the way the council wants to go, it could also include reporting to the council. Because what happens sometimes, it gets lost, is the council doesn't see any minutes, they don't see any outcomes. We just have a staff report that includes no input from the committee, and so we lose a lot. And I don't see any reason why we couldn't do both.
Mayor Holman, if I can just make an observation, I think what the process that was used for the housing element update that went so efficiently last year was what the city attorney described, where the city manager solicited interest from members of the community and selected from the applicants a balanced group that worked with the staff. We had regular reports to, in that case, it was to a council committee, but we were able to, share the work of the committee, and ultimately it was their recommendation, that came forward for the council's action. So, I mean, I think that's a model that has worked quite recently, and we'd be happy to follow that model and solicit applications from people at the summit and encourage people who don't get appointed to participate in the meetings, which would be public meetings, noticed, even though they would not be required under the Brown Act. That's, again, what we did with the housing element group.
You're right, though. There is a difference there, though, because there was a housing element committee. And so people came and reported to that. There were people on that committee. Actually, at one point in time, there was a planning commissioner who was on that committee who actually sat at the table with it. So we had some direct input. So what I'm looking for is direct input.
So just, Madam Mayor, if the important thing for the Brown Act is if the council sets up the committee by vote tonight, that is a Brown Act body. Okay.
So what my proposal was that the council could submit names to the city manager. He could select from those, and names could also be coming forth from the summit. So he would have a pool of people to draw from.
Yes, I'm sorry if I wasn't, I think I wasn't clear. It's not just the composition of the committee, it's the establishment of the committee. So the motion on the floor now would create a Brown Act body.
So we could say something, for example, like the council would move to request the city manager to solicit interest in participants at the summit, to form a working group, to meet on a regular basis for the duration of the comprehensive plan update with regular check-ins with the city council.
Yeah, I didn't see this as prescriptive. I didn't see this as prescriptive.
So there are some cases on this, and I appreciate the creativity of the planning director, but I think it would be better for the council not to reflect this direction in any action tonight, and I think the planning director has gotten the message and will compose a committee through the city manager, and I'm sure that the city manager will solicit council members for their suggestions and recruit widely for it.
So if you have amended language you think the motion should say, so that it doesn't look like we're being prescriptive and the council's forming the committee, I'm open to that.
I recommend that you don't address the topic by motion tonight, unless you wish to create a formal Brown Act body.
Could I ask a question?
That's, okay. Councilmember Burt, since you're seconding the motion, do you have any comments? Okay, Councilmember Wolbach and then Councilmember Du Bois.
Yeah, so I think that it's not, just to make sure I'm clear on the advice we're getting from the city attorney, it's not the details of the composition or selection of the committee being prescriptive that leads to it being a Brown Act committee. It's the very creation of the committee by direction of the council that makes it a Brown Act body.
That's what the case law says, and that's the case whether the council directly creates the committee or directs its official to create the committee.
Thank you. That's what I understood. I appreciate you clarifying that. In that case, having heard that
Right, I defer to you, but I haven't even spoken in a second, so let's not go into positions on this.
Fair enough.
So my quick question was a lot of these committees are told to act as if they're under the Brown Act anyways. So why not just make it a Brown Act committee? Why is that an issue?
I don't think that that's an issue, other than it does pose a constraint on members of the committee. The serial meetings issue is often very difficult for newly appointed members of the public, particularly with a large group. It's hard to keep track of that as well. We do, when we form committees like this, notice them in advance, make them open to the public, make sure the agendas are posted in advance, and we don't discuss items that are not on the agenda. So in that sense, we do follow those tenets of the Brown Act.
I mean, with the Housing Committee, you asked the members to treat it like a Brown Act. If you had a 40-person committee, no more than 20 people could talk outside the meeting.
I know.
I mean, is it really an issue?
We did. We've had some committees recently who found that constraint to be too much of a constraint and said, hey, we're not subject to the Brown Act. Do we really have to count how many people we talk to outside the meeting? So that's just the one area that we would enjoy the luxury of not having to keep tabs on that if we didn't have to.
Councilmember Burt.
Yeah, so Molly, do you happen to know when we had our former Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, CPAC, was that fully Brown Acted?
No, I don't know the answer to that, Councilmember Burt.
Okay. Because I'm not necessarily opposed to having it be a Brown Acted committee. And it would be, in all likelihood, a large committee. And anybody who, if we have 30 members and anybody who thinks that they have to meet with more than 15 or in series, then they probably should choose a different committee to be on. So I don't really have a problem with that. If they have that complaint, then too bad.
Just reply all to email, probably. Hillary, did you want to say something?
I should just clarify, it's not just meeting with the other 15 people, but it's a constraint on emailing the rest of the group outside of
Yeah, I
meetings.
understand the Brown Act.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that we had, when we had the SOFA plan that was Brown Acted, and we had a fairly large group, maybe that was 15, and people adapted pretty well to it. It wasn't a big deal. So I think the question before us is, are we comfortable with this just being a Brown Acted committee? And then what additional kind of guidance there? So the more I think about it, I think I would like to go ahead and continue with the motion with the understanding that it would be Brown Acted. I would add that language where it says to a working group, I would add a working group of diverse stakeholders. And this is akin to what we had in the SOFA committees. So Mayor Holman, is that language good? So I'll just speak to that as well. We actually, when we set up this, we had people apply for specific stakeholder positions. So we defined the set of stakeholder positions and then took applicants for each. That may be a way to do it. I'm not going to put in the motion how we would execute that diverse stakeholders. We may want to have a little more conversation on that after we give it some thought. But I just want to toss that that's one method that we might use. And I also wouldn't want to imply that the current leadership committee wouldn't be strongly considered to be part of this, but I agree that it shouldn't just be rolled into them. And I think there are people in that committee who have been engaging in the comp plan. Whether they had a background in it, I actually wouldn't agree that that matters. When we had CPAC, most of the people in it didn't come into it with a background. They acquired it, they dove into it, and everybody learned. Same thing with the SOFA areas. They had their certain stakeholder expertise, but we didn't know much about concept plans or coordinate the specific plans. Those are the reasons that I would still welcome going forward with this, and kind of the guidance on what I'm thinking would be its structure. It's a pretty important decision, actually. This will have a big influence on how this process moves forward. So I think that one of the things we'll want to do, undoubtedly this will return to us, right, for some way in which we would put some meat on the bone as to how this would be structured and how we would go about interviewing and selecting candidates and those kinds of things, right? Doesn't have enough clarity to go forward.
Well, thank you for that question, Councilmember Byrd. I think that depends on the council's intention. If you want the city manager to solicit applications and make appointments like we did with the housing committee, then...
Oh, no, we just said we were going to do a Brown Acted committee.
Well, just by, I think the city attorney's indicated, just by calling for the creation of the committee this evening,
okay,
it is a Brown Act committee.
Then it appears that we need to add that clarity. So one question before us then would be whether we intend for this to be a city manager appointed committee or a council appointed committee. And depending on our determination there, what process do we need to go through to really give design of how this committee would be created?
Well, it's the maker of the motion. So for me, if it's simply city manager appointed committee and we're having this motion here, I don't know why we would even do the motion if we just want it to be a city manager appointed committee. Because we could ask meetings to be noticed and all that kind of thing. So I don't see really the advantage if we're just deferring all of our capability of providing or even selecting the committee members to the city manager.
So if I can, I'm sorry, if I can make a suggestion, I think Councilmember Burt's suggestion that the council try and identify for us the stakeholder interests that would like to be represented. I'm just concerned that if the council itself makes these appointments and reviews applications and the like, we're talking about a long process, not just for the council, the evening that you make those appointments or the evenings that you review those applications and make those appointments, but for the staff to do that, to design that process. We know that the council has a lot of business to get done before the summer break, and when you get back, we're going to have even more for you. So I'm just concerned that that would be a time-consuming way. If we could find another way to accomplish your objectives of a consistent, appointed group with a wide variety of interests, I think that would be terrific.
How about this, that we add that the staff shall return to the council with a proposal for stakeholder selection, the stakeholder selection process, and the purposes of the, do we want to call it, well, we'll call it Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee unless somebody comes up with a better title. And so I think, Hillary, you had said that you want us to say what stakeholders. I actually would like you to come back. You can review what we had in the prior comp plan and what we did, for instance, with the SOFA plan, and you'll see that there's at least a good starting point for the types of stakeholders, rather than us try and come up with this on the fly, and then we can always modify what you bring back.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Burt. Of course, we'd be happy to do that. My only concern is timing. If we're viewing the summit as the opportunity to recruit and solicit applications for this group, I'm not sure that we can make that timing work and bring an item back to you before then.
Well, I could see where you could still be doing recruiting at the summit, but not selection, and not, I think you'll actually, when you look at the categories of stakeholders that we've used in the past, they're not rocket science. And so I think we may modify them, but I think giving people a sense of the type of stakeholder categories, you'll see that we probably had pretty good alignment between what we had in the former CPAC and what we had in the SOFA plan. You just look at them and they're different categories of neighborhood representatives, and then people who have some transportation knowledge and affordable housing knowledge, and certain people from the business community. You know, it's not unusual sorts of categories we're talking about. And we may refine it, but at least for the purposes of the summit, if you want to, you know, be able to say, we'll be looking for people who have interests or expertise in these areas, but not limited to. And that leaves it wide open for us to refine that when you come back.
Did the Assistant City Manager have a comment you wanted to make?
I was actually perhaps suggesting similar lines of what Councilmember Burt did, that we come back with some categories for the stakeholder group to be, again, solicited. So I think we're thinking along similar lines. Again, it comes down to a question of how specific the council would like to get in the identification of ultimately the individuals.
There is one word that needs to be added. It says Councilmember Burt to form.
Pardon me?
In the motion itself, Councilmember Burt to form a working group. So I added that word.
There we go. I
have lights from 4 council members. We're not moving very quickly here. Councilmember Filseth.
I think this is a thoughtful discussion. I think my comfort level is higher with the structure proposed by the city attorney. I worry that we're adding, particularly when we start going down Brown acted committees and so forth, is that we're going down a path of introducing a lot of rigidity and you know, Transparency, yeah, transparency. A lot of rigidity and structure pretty early in this process, and there's a lot of stuff left to be done. We already have sort of a lot of groups involved in this. There's us, and there's the Planning Transportation Committee and the stakeholder group, right? And you know, we're going to have the open source process and so forth here. I worry that we're adding too much structure to this and inflexibility right now. So I guess, I mean, going down this direction seems like a good direction. My personal comfort level is going to be higher with the structure that the city attorney suggested.
Councilmember Du Bois.
Yeah, I was actually interested in the open source process. I understand that this is a proposal to replace that, correct? It would be in addition to? Was that your understanding?
I think if I understand the council's intention, we would form this committee of appointed representatives. We would also solicit information in kind of an open source process, and this committee would actually help us evaluate the input that comes in through that open source process.
So these would be additional meetings, not happening at the same time. My concern is members of the public diligently show up and they're told they can only speak at the beginning or end of the meeting and not participate. I would rather see if people show up to a majority of the meetings, they'd be treated like a full member of the committee. If it was one meeting, if you're having separate meetings and you're still going to do the open source, great. But you know, it's a busy time. Well, I think we want more participation, not less. And I think there's a little bit of a feeling that you're not included if you're not on the selected group. So I would not want to discourage people from participating.
If I might just add a little bit of, and just playing on the sofa experience. A lot of people come to meetings, but they don't consistently come to meetings. And so the purpose of this is to have a group of people that consistently come to meetings, that listen to any input from any individuals or representatives from groups or organizations. So it's still open source, but this is providing a steady continuum throughout the process.
So would you be open to an amendment that said something like, member of the public would be entitled to participate equally with the working group if they come to a majority of meetings? Otherwise, they can only do it during the time for public comment?
Then that totally is counter to having a committee.
They come to every meeting.
Can I try some? So, you know, if we were talking about trying to have a large volume of people participate in these big meetings, you really have to look at the practical impact of at what point, how large of a group and subgroups can you have that can work effectively. And I think our last Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee was pretty large. It was 30+ people ultimately. But then they broke into subgroups on transportation and housing and those things, and they were more manageable. They might be 6 or 8 people in a subgroup. In the SOFA process, we had, for instance, we had neighborhood representatives, both on representing the neighborhood as stakeholders and then neighborhood folks who were also other stakeholder representatives. But then we organized as a neighborhood active subgroup advisory groups that inform that representative. And in reality, you know, if we go back and talk about classical Athenian democracy, you know, at what point in time do you have 300 people all trying to speak to a subject and voting on each thing? There are, and then we got the other extreme that Councilmember Philseth was saying, well, even this might be too rigid. Well, I think that this is a public, transparent process that's being proposed here. And I think we shouldn't forget that we've all talked about our allegiance to transparency. So having an open public meeting is an important part of fulfilling that commitment to transparency. At the same time, having 2 different layers to this, where we have the open meetings and the open source process that feeds into this, I think is the right balance between these 2 different approaches, where everybody who wants to participate can have a significant voice. But in reality, you can't work effectively on products in a massive group. So there are trade-offs and compromises. I think this is a good balance.
Okay, we have two more. Do Councilmember Wobach and Vice Mayor Schmidt both want to speak to this, and then let's vote. Councilmember Wobach.
Okay, so a couple questions. First, actually, if it's all right for me to ask a question of Councilmember Du Bois, you were on the Housing Element Committee last year, correct? The fact that it was not a Brown-acted organization, how restrictive did you find that? Or sorry, how liberating was that, and would it have been restrictive to?
We were told to act as if it was a Brown Act committee.
Okay, so it didn't really make a big difference. Because like Councilmember Philseth, I was also leaning towards not having a motion, but I think the transparency is useful, and if it doesn't make that big a practical difference, then I think it's useful to have some level of council input. However, the question of timing is also important. When this comes back to council for approval, can it go on the consent calendar? I'm not asking necessarily will it, but is it the type of...
What can go on consent calendar is a completed action that just requires you to say aye. So if you need to define categories of stakeholders or appoint individuals, that is not a consent item, that's an action item.
Right. Now, if the, so I guess my hope at least is that when this does come back, that staff will have looked at the prior examples, SOFA, previous CPAC, we'll have a proposal in a staff report, it'll be on consent, and if we don't like it, we can pull it. I'm leaning towards supporting it.
Vice Mayor Schmidt.
I'm a little confused. When we came in tonight, you presented a chart of the flow, starting with the summit, and the summit was open to anyone there, and anyone at the summit could then sign up for follow-up committees. And I thought there was going to be a series of open committees where people could say, gee, I want to talk about transportation or natural resources, and there'd be a focus committee on that. And then you had a structure where each month after the break, there would be a council meeting and a committee meeting going on, so there'd be interactions between those committees. Did I get that right?
Thank you for the question, Vice Mayor Schmidt. I think what we were trying to show is that there would be community meetings. We call them working sessions, scheduled in advance on each of these topics. It wouldn't be that there would be a committee created for each one.
Right. It was an open committee, so
That's
anyone
right.
could go to a topic of their interest.
That's correct.
And there might be several meetings of a committee on a single topic. So
That's correct. Some elements or topics are going to take multiple meetings. Some are maybe going to be faster than others.
It seems this is going in a different direction where we end up with a single committee that is not open in the sense that anyone can join it and participate. And the interaction with the council, would you still schedule monthly meetings? How would the council interact in the process?
The structure that we showed had the council acting independently on issues that ultimately provide guidance to the committee. So the council is talking about some of the big issues and ideas that need to be fed into the committee's work or the community working groups' work. I don't see that would change, and we would still have this challenge of regular check-ins, finding a way to walk back and forth between the two parallel activities.
Yeah, I guess I'm much more attracted to your earlier idea of using the summit as a recruiting tool for a large pool of people who are free to follow up areas of interest to them with a continual interaction with the council. So I see getting a committee of stakeholders as narrowing that. Stakeholders are good when you have a technical focused topic, but on something as important as the comp plan, I would think that is too much of a narrowing.
Yeah.
So I'd probably vote against.
Okay. Well, Vice Mayor Schmidt, if I could just add one additional comment. I think the proposal that's being advanced uses this appointed committee, but is attempting not to lose this concept of open sourcing. So the meetings would be in public, people would be encouraged to participate even if they weren't on the committee, and there would be active engagement online and in other ways to try and get broad participation even from people who weren't on the committee. Enough ways for people to participate that happened.
Yes, participating as a member of the public rather than as a member of the committee.
Correct.
Councilmember Du Bois.
Thanks for that clarification. I'm still confused how the open source committee is going to interact with the seated committee and who's going to carry more weight. And I would vote against this motion as I understand it now. So I'd really like some clarity either from the makers or from the planning director.
Thank you.
So
Councilmember Du Bois.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what I had understood the motion to be would be to set up an appointed committee, but not to lose this concept of open sourcing. So the committee would meet in public. We would do everything we could to ensure wide participation by members of the public who are not on the committee. And we'd make ways for them to participate at the meetings, online and in other ways, so that we still had, at the end of the day, a comprehensive plan update that we could say had been open sourced, even though there was an appointed committee that was helping to coalesce and evaluate the input that was coming in from the wide variety of sources.
Okay. So are we doubling your work? Are you holding more meetings now, or they're all the same number?
I don't see it as doubling my work once the committee's established. The idea of coming back to the council multiple times to establish a committee is effort that we weren't anticipating, particularly in advance of the summit.
Karen, can I?
So let me give a shot at this. So I agree with pretty much everything that you said, Director Gittleman, and this does not eliminate the open input, the open source, and the input from the public in general. It is not to replace that. This is, I'll be briefly redundant, that people come to meetings, but they don't come to meetings consistently. Most people don't. They'll come to the summit, you'll have maybe 300 people there, and the next meeting you might have 30, who knows? So the purpose of this is to have an established group that commits to carrying through the conversation of the comp plan, to act as advisors. That's the purpose of this. Councilmember Byrd, a second, if you want to say something, then I have 3 other lights.
Yeah, and I'll say that in the prior comp plan, we did have something similar to this. We had some very well-attended open public meetings where we had hundreds of people there. And the input from those meetings, and we had charrettes and different really valuable, informative meetings. If you have this open source, who takes all the input from the open source and turns it into a presentation? As we have it set up right now, it would be staff that would be filtering all that information from the open source. This committee instead would be a citizen group who would be taking that information and doing deep dives into the comp plan enough that they would really understand it pretty backwards and forwards and attempt to consolidate that information, as well as it would include their own inputs, and to integrate it and to reconcile it. And it's a citizen committee that would be doing that function. That's a pretty democratic process. I think that actually relying on staff to be the filter of all the open source input from the public is less grassroots and less democratic than what this would be.
So I have lights from Filseth and Wilbach. Do we need more clarification, or can we vote?
I'd like to offer a friendly amendment, actually, to address what I see as one of the key concerns here. I would, if it's accepted by the maker and the seconder, to direct the city manager and staff to form a working group at the very start, where it says, Councilmember Burt to direct staff or to direct the city manager to form a working group. That way, we are establishing it, we are making the direction, it will be Brown Acted because it's coming from our direction, but we're not mandating that every step of the formation process come back to us for review. That allows a little bit more flexibility in the establishment by the city manager and staff, and requires less micromanaging by us.
I guess my thought about that is we aren't establishing stakeholder groups, and I don't, at least built into this at this point in time, doesn't have the council even having input on who those individuals might be. I guess that could be incorporated. Councilmember Burt.
Well, this is a viable alternative, and I'd say that there's kind of a hybrid between those as well, which is that the stakeholder categories could still come to the council for approval, and we could delegate to the city manager and staff the selection of the individuals to serve within each of those categories or represent those categories. So I would be open to that process. It is, I mean, in the SOFA plan, it actually did come to council, and we had applicants for each of the stakeholder groups, and the council selected. So it can go either way, and I could live with either way. Let me go back to the maker after those comments and see what she says.
If we can add number 2, direct city manager and staff, just there are 2 twos in there. To form a working group, the first stakeholders will be formed to work through the comprehensive plan update process. Staff shall return to the council with a proposal of stakeholder, if we're trying to...
Categories.
I was going to say stakeholder, yes, categories is fine. To replace categories.
Replace?
With, no, that was for myself, so never mind. Categories with council members having the capability of making working group member recommendations to city manager and staff.
Let me ask how that process would go. That sounds pretty ad hoc, that council member who shouts loudest in the ear of the city manager gets the appointment made?
Well, I would hope the city manager has enough experience not to listen to somebody more who yells louder.
Why don't we, I mean, we're free to encourage people to apply for the stakeholder positions, but as far as trying to be those who would influence the city manager to make certain selections and not others, I think that gets pretty politicized.
Okay, I could see that. Okay,
so
then the motion would stop after categories, actually. And I mean, so it wouldn't, categories.
Well, we would want to, well, I guess what we want to say is that the staff, not just to form, it would really be to select. That's what we mean by forming, right? Now, what we haven't talked about here is kind of the scope and purpose either. So let me add this then, that staff shall return to council with a proposal of stakeholder group categories, and along with, I should say along with rather than and, along with a proposed purpose and scope of the CPAC committee.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did I miss this?
It's half of it is already there. It already said purposes.
Okay, so there's a little repetition down at the bottom here. Oh, I see it, yeah.
So you want to keep, City Clerk, you want to keep along with the proposed purpose and scope of the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. Delete everything in between.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, that's good. Okay, are we there?
It's not grammatically right.
And where we have, and staff, direct the city manager and staff to form, I would say to select.
I really want to keep the word form there because we can have input, and I think form is a better selection
Well,
of
what do you
words.
mean by input then? Or is that a workaround against what I spoke against?
No,
So what do you mean?
because it sounds like, if you use the word select, it sounds as
But
though
what do you mean by form?
form is to coalesce. in
I
my
don't know what that
opinion.
means. To create it, you're saying?
Okay, to create then, how is that word?
Well, I'm just trying to ask, no, wait, let's slow down on the changes. I'm asking what's meant here, and then I can come back with what I agree or don't agree with. I'm trying to understand what you mean by form. Is it to select? I mean, we're going to be doing the purpose and the scope. So what is there to the forming that is different from selecting?
Because it seems like we're deferring the whole selection process to city manager and staff without
The
council
selection of
input.
individuals, we would be, yes. So you're saying, now this is what I was asking about, the workaround. If you're meaning that form means that council members would still have this, be allowed to campaign to the, I'll call it, this is my wording, campaign to the city manager on who ought to be selected, I go back to my original point that I think that might work great for the people that I want to have selected. But I think it's.
Okay, I don't, it is.
I think it's high politicized.
It's 10:38, and I'm not going to argue over one word that I think doesn't make any difference.
Well, I think it is substantial in the difference. Whether you, if you mean that that the city manager would be selecting based upon recommendations from the council, that's different from that the city manager would be selecting based on his own best judgment and staff's. Those are two, that is a difference. So let's be clear on which it is, and then we can agree or disagree. But let's not use a word that has ambiguity.
Okay, so let's look at direct city manager and staff to form a working group of diverse stakeholders from a created from a an application process. So in other words, I don't want to, that's
Okay,
too
so I
formal.
want to eliminate.
That's too formal.
So I want to eliminate the ambiguity of form, because I'm concerned that putting this in here is intended to mean something different from selecting. Selecting is clearer.
Change form to select a working group of diverse stakeholders created from from applications.
Okay.
From applications received,
From an open application process.
okay, that's fine, from an open application process, okay. And then it doesn't read right, though, for will be formed.
Yeah.
Process to work through the comprehensive plan, okay. All right, now are we there? And I still have two more lights, folks.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Schmidt?
Move the question.
Okay, so we vote on the board.
This is just on whether to move to.
Oh, that,
We first vote on whether we're going to vote.
that's right. So, council members,
It's whether we're going to vote. Without further discussion.
okay, that passes on a 5-1 vote. Councilmember Filseth voting no. Councilmembers Niss, Berman, Scharf absent, so we'll now vote on the motion. It's a mystery.
You want to throw yours in?
Vice Mayor Schmidt.
Holman, yours isn't. Schmidt's isn't.
Mine isn't?
Yeah.
Okay, so that passes on a 4-2 vote. Council members Filseth and Vice Mayor Schmidt voting no. Council members Niss, Scharf, Berman absent. So it is
Mayor Holman,
a
this
quarter to
raises
11.
a question about whether the council has taken an action tonight on this item. You have 4 affirmative votes on a council of 9.
Yes, this is what we talked about earlier, isn't it? So is it an affirmative vote or not?
So I think with respect to actually setting up a committee, it's not sufficient to do that, and you should. Did you
We
have
had
5?
4 to 2.
I'm sorry, can you explain that?
So you have a 9-member council and a majority is 5. So you generally need 5 to take an action. Certainly our charter requires that for contracts, employment, any kind of ordinance. I'm not sure that we've looked at this with respect to setting up an advisory committee, but it is a somewhat formal body. So I don't know if council is comfortable setting it up with four votes out of 9-member council.
Well, it still has to come back to full council anyway, right?
So that's a great point. That makes sense to do it that way. So why didn't council take staff take this as direction to return with the items that council asked for, and then you can get a vote with all members present. Thank you, Councilmember Byrd.
So it is a quarter to 11. We do have a closed session item. I don't know if staff feels like you have enough guidance from the council members from their comments about these vision statements.
Thank you, Mayor Holman.
I think if we should do a lightning round.
We did get substantive comments from the council that I think we can incorporate into a third version at some point in this process to bring back to the council. I think it would be useful to continue this discussion at some point about the structure that's created by the goals, but I recognize it's so hard to compare those 2 columns. We'll have to give some thought to how to pose the question in a more constructive way to get that input from you. Just given our calendars between now and the council break, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that before then, but the input we got this evening was valuable, and we will incorporate that into the next version of the vision statements that you see.
So my comment on the structure of the goals is consistent with what we talked about earlier. They aren't comparing apples to apples now, so there's not a parallel track. So if something's talking about water and air quality isn't commensurate, so they need to stagger. So you can't compare apples to oranges and then expect people to comment on them. So I think that structure needs to change. Councilmember Du Bois, Councilmember Wilbach.
Could we do a 2-minute lightning round? I guess I should just go ahead and do it.
On goals?
Yeah. I had some real specific comments.
On goals? I don't know how we're not going to be able to do, I can't imagine we're going to be able to do 2-minute lightning round on goals.
So just 2 minutes of comment on process, I guess. But so again, I think it'd be much useful to align common goals regardless of number.
So I guess we're doing a 2-minute lightning round.
Is that all right?
So set the timer for 2 minutes,
Okay,
please.
good. So again, even if it's different numbers, I'd rather see current L7 equals old L4.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm saying even if the numbers change, I'd rather see the same topic aligned rather than have it be in the footnotes. I'm wondering if maybe we could make a quick motion to email our comments into the planning director on details. I did want to propose perhaps 2 new goals, worded as goals. One would be focusing on grade crossings with our train corridor. And the second would be, I want to make it specifically about Cumberland, but that's probably too detailed for a goal, but a community center, senior wellness center in South Palo Alto. Those are 2 new goals I'd like to see added. Thanks.
Question for the director is, should there be some reference to those in the visions before we pop them into goals? Hillary? Shouldn't there be some brief reference to those in the vision statement before we pop them into goals?
Well, I don't think it's possible to have the vision statements, just...
They can't cover everything, of course, but...
Yeah, be a laundry list of every topic, but we take the point that those are issues that are going to have to be included.
Okay, Councilmember Woebach, Councilmember Burt.
I actually do have a couple of comments that I could do in a 2-minute lightning round, but I'd actually like to defer to Councilmember Burt and hear his thoughts. I think they're going to be on process.
Yes.
Councilmember Burt.
So I have a bunch of comments on goals, and I won't attempt to offer them up tonight. So my question is, so if we did do, as Councilmember Du Bois suggested, of input to the Director of Community Development, those would only be input and advisory for you to take as you just see as comments and non-binding, correct? That's the way it needs to be. Just want to make that clear.
It is a little bit of an unusual process, and to the extent that council members are commenting on the same items, it puts the staff in a difficult position to weigh and balance those, and does potentially create some Brown Act issues as well.
So that's why I really wanted to frame it that we would not be able to give explicit direction in any way. These are comments for staff to consider, but not a binding direction. Otherwise, we don't do it at all. I mean, you can give your input on whether what I described is permissible, but I feel comfortable that more than that is not permissible, and I want to find out whether this level is, or we should be thinking about another occasion to be able to publicly give that input. Make time. No, we can have a study session.
Do we have any comment down there?
We can try it. It's certainly not a way of working that we should get into the habit of engaging in, but
I don't have a problem with us scheduling a separate study session on an off night or something. I know we have a busy schedule, but if that's a better way to do it. This is an important discussion. This thing's been going on for several years, and the council has never had an opportunity to weigh in on the goals. So if we have to bite the bullet and have another meeting, I'm okay with that too.
So why don't I work with the planning director and suggest figure out a process, given what council has said tonight, and get back to you with a recommendation.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, Councilmember Woebach.
Okay, I actually agree that we should have this discussion in public, and I'm okay with doing it tonight, especially if we're quick, or at least starting it. And if we feel it needs to be continued and picked up further in the future, then we do that. I'm fine with having a short discussion tonight, though.
I can't imagine there's any way it's going to be a short discussion, and it's 10 to 11. If we could make it a short discussion, Councilmember Woebach, I would be all for it, but it's not going to be a short discussion.
Okay.
Look how we've been 2+ hours on vision. Other council members? You need to turn your mic on.
I don't think it's a short discussion either. I think a study session is the right approach.
And we can look for an additional date, depending on what kind of input you get. We can look for an additional date. They are hard to come by. The calendar is full. They are hard to come by. And we will get some pushback too. So just be aware of that. So with that, we conclude this item, and we go then to council member questions, comments, and announcements. Anyone have any? Seeing none, this meeting adjourns to another closed session, but I need a motion.
Move that we go to closed session. Second.
I'm looking for an agenda so I can read what it is. Thank you. The closed session is Conference with Labor Negotiations. Authority is Government Code Section 54957.6. Agency representatives, Mayor Karen Holman, CAO Chair Pat Burt, PSO Director Catherine Shen, unrepresented employee, City Clerk. So we need a motion.
So moved. Second.
Okay, so we are voting to go into closed session. Vote on the board, please. That passes on a 6-0 vote with council members Wolbach, council members Berman, Scharf, and Nis absent.
From downtown Palo Alto that was really a comp night, and the council and a sort of a budget night, and the prediction by Giannotti was incredible. He predicted 10:43 and it was 10:46 that they went to closed session by 3 minutes. Giannotti's had a busy weekend.